Tonight, Evan Ross made a choice that would change everything. Exhausted, broke, and facing 5 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, he spotted a stranger stranded in the deadliest storm of the year. Every instinct screamed to keep driving, to protect himself, to get home to his daughter. But he stopped. He helped. And in that rain-soaked moment of kindness, he unknowingly saved the one person who held his entire future in her hands, the judge who would decide his fate. Stay with me until the end of this incredible story, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale of justice and second chances has traveled. The windshield wipers were losing their battle against the rain. Evan Ross gripped the steering wheel of his 14-year-old Honda Civic, his knuckles white against the worn leather, his eyes burning from 16 straight hours of work. The storm had transformed the highway into a dark, violent river, and every few seconds the headlights of oncoming traffic would blind him with spray and chaos. Come on, he muttered, leaning forward as if those extra 3 inches would help him see through the wall of water. Just get home. Just get home to Maddie. Maddie. 8 years old, asleep right now, he hoped, in the small bedroom of their even smaller apartment, probably with Mr. Whiskers, the stuffed cat, tucked under her chin and her nightlight casting stars across the ceiling. She had no idea that in 72 hours her father might be ripped away from her for 5 years. 5 years. The thought made Evan's chest tighten until he could barely breathe. 5 years in prison for embezzling money he'd never touched, never even knew existed until the accusations started flying. 5 years away from bedtime stories and scraped knees and school plays. 5 years of Maddie growing up without him, just like she'd grown up without her mother. No, Evan said aloud, his voice harsh in the small car. No. That's not happening. It can't happen. But the court date loomed like a death sentence. Monday morning, 9 a.m., Superior Court, 3 days away. 72 hours until he stood before a judge and jury and tried to convince them that Victor Hale, his boss, his mentor, the man who'd given him a chance when no one else would, had framed him for theft. $47,000. That's what they said he'd stolen. $47,000 that had mysteriously vanished from company accounts, with digital fingerprints pointing straight to Evan's employee ID and computer login. But I didn't do it, Evan whispered, the same words he'd been repeating for 3 months. I didn't do it. The public defender assigned to his case, a tired woman named Patricia Chen, who juggled 70 cases at once, had been honest with him last week. Brutally honest. Evan, the evidence is circumstantial, but it's damning, she'd said, not quite meeting his eyes across the scratched table in the courthouse meeting room. The prosecution has documents, timestamps, digital records. Unless we can prove someone else accessed your credentials, unless we can show the jury reasonable doubt. Unless what? Evan had demanded, his voice cracking. Unless I get lucky. Unless some miracle happens. Patricia had just looked at him with the exhausted sympathy of someone who'd seen too many innocent people convicted. Unless you prepare for the possibility that you might lose. A flash of lightning illuminated the highway, and for a split second Evan could see everything. The flooded road, the swaying trees, the abandoned gas station half a mile ahead. Then darkness swallowed it all again. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. Evan glanced down. Mrs. Kowalski, his 68-year-old neighbor who watched Maddie during his shifts. She's fine. Asleep. Drive safe in this weather, dear. Evan's throat tightened. Mrs. Kowalski didn't know about the court case. Nobody did except Patricia and the prosecutor and Victor Hale and his army of expensive lawyers. Evan had kept it secret from everyone, from his co-workers, from Maddie's school, from his handful of friends. He couldn't bear the looks of pity. Couldn't bear the whispers. And he especially couldn't bear telling Maddie that Daddy might have to go away. She thinks I'm just working late, Evan said to the empty car, his voice breaking. She thinks everything's fine. She thinks we're fine. They weren't fine. They were drowning in medical debt from his late wife Sarah's cancer treatments 3 years ago. They were living paycheck to paycheck in a neighborhood that wasn't great but wasn't terrible. They were surviving on boxed mac and cheese and store-brand cereal and the kind of careful budgeting that meant Evan hadn't bought himself new clothes in 2 years. But they were together. And that had always been enough, until Victor Hale decided it wasn't. Evan's hands tightened on the wheel. He could still remember the day Victor had called him into the executive office, all glass and chrome and leather, so different from the cramped warehouse floor where Evan worked inventory management. Victor had been smiling, actually smiling. "Evan, there's been a serious discrepancy in the accounts," Victor had said smoothly, his silver cufflinks glinting under the expensive lights. "And unfortunately, all the evidence points to you." "What?" "No, there must be some mistake. Oh, I wish there was." Victor had leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting to something almost sad. Almost. "I gave you a chance when you needed one, Evan. After your wife died, when you were desperate for work, I brought you into this company, and this is how you repay me?" "I didn't steal anything," Evan had shouted, his voice echoing off the glass. "Victor, you know me. I would never—" "The police are already involved. I suggest you contact a lawyer." That had been 3 months ago. 3 months of investigations and interrogations and sleepless nights. 3 months of watching his daughter's innocent smile while carrying the weight of knowing he might disappear from her life. Another flash of lightning, this one closer. Evan squinted through the rain, trying to focus on the road. The double shift at the warehouse had been brutal, loading trucks, processing shipments, inventory counts that never seemed to end. He'd taken every extra hour his manager offered, because the legal fees were destroying what little savings he had left. Patricia might be a public defender, but there were still court costs, filing fees, the price of getting documents reviewed. Everything cost money. Money Evan didn't have. Money he definitely hadn't stolen. "Just get home," he told himself again. "Get home, check on Maddie, sleep for 4 hours, then figure out—" His headlights caught something. A car. Pulled off to the side of the road, hazard lights blinking weakly through the downpour. A dark luxury sedan, BMW maybe, or Mercedes, sitting at an awkward angle, half in the grass, half on the shoulder. And beside it, barely visible in the sheets of rain, a figure. Evan's foot moved toward the brake instinctively, then hesitated. Someone was stranded out there, in this storm, in the middle of nowhere at almost midnight. But Evan was exhausted. He was scared. He was 72 hours away from potentially losing everything. He needed to get home, needed to see Maddie, needed to— His mother's voice echoed in his mind, as clear as if she were sitting in the passenger seat beside him. "The real you shows when life is falling apart, Evan. That's when character matters. That's when you find out who you really are." His mother had died when Evan was 19, but her words had stayed with him through every hard moment since. Through Sarah's diagnosis, through her death, through single fatherhood and poverty, and now this nightmare with Victor Hale. When you're at your lowest, baby, that's when you have to be your best. That's when it counts. Evan's car slowed. "This is stupid," he said aloud. "This is so stupid. You need to get home. You need to—" But he was already pulling over, already parking behind the luxury sedan with its designer curves and gleaming paint job that probably cost more than Evan made in a year. The rain hammered against his roof like judgment. For a long moment, Evan just sat there, engine idling, watching the figure beside the other car through his rain-streaked windshield. Definitely a woman. He could see her silhouette now, huddled against the driver's side door, shoulders hunched against the storm. "You don't have time for this," Evan told himself. "You have to think about Maddie. You have to think about—" But he was already opening the door. The rain hit him like a physical blow. Within seconds, Evan was soaked through his worn work jacket, his jeans, his boots that had holes in the soles he kept covering with duct tape. The cold was shocking, stealing his breath. He ran toward the woman, squinting against the downpour. "Hey!" he shouted over the roar of the storm. "Are you okay?" She spun toward him, and Evan got his first real look at her. Early 40s, maybe. Tall and slender, wearing what had probably been an elegant pantsuit before the rain destroyed it. Dark hair plastered to her face, eyes wide with surprise and something else. Relief? Fear? He couldn't tell. Yes, I mean," she had to shout to be heard. "My car won't start. The battery, I think, but I can't." Lightning cracked across the sky, close enough that Evan felt the electricity in the air. The woman flinched, wrapping her arms around herself. She was shivering violently. "How long have you been out here?" Evan yelled. Maybe an hour. I tried calling for help, but there's no signal and... An hour. Jesus. She could have hypothermia. Okay, and... Evan said, his tired brain shifting into problem-solving mode despite everything. "Let me look at your car. You should get in mine. Get warm." "No, I can help." "You're freezing," Evan interrupted. "Please, just... My car's running. It's warm. I'll check your battery." She hesitated, and Evan could see her struggling with the idea of trusting a stranger. He understood. Middle of nowhere, midnight, violent storm. He wouldn't trust him either. "I'm Evan," he said, trying to make his voice gentle despite the screaming wind. "I'm just trying to help, I promise." Something in his tone must have convinced her because she nodded. "Maren, thank you. Thank you so much." Maren hurried toward Evan's Honda while he moved to the luxury sedan's hood. His hands were already numb from the cold as he popped it open, using his phone's flashlight to illuminate the engine. Battery. Just like she'd thought. The terminals were corroded, and in this weather, with the electrical load from her trying to start it repeatedly... "I can fix this," Evan muttered. He ran back to his car where Maren sat in the passenger seat looking like a drowned cat, her expensive clothes ruined, her teeth chattering. She glanced up at him with those wide eyes. Brown, he noticed now, deep brown, and tried to smile. "Is it bad?" she asked. "Battery terminals are corroded. I have cables and a cleaning kit in my trunk. I'll jump it, clean the connections, should get you going." "You carry battery cleaning supplies in your car?" Evan shrugged, already heading toward his trunk. "When you drive a car that's 14 years old and barely running, you learn to carry everything." It took him 20 minutes in the pouring rain, 20 minutes of working with freezing fingers, using the wire brush from his emergency kit to clean the terminals, connecting the jumper cables, letting his battery feed power into hers. 20 minutes of getting more soaked, more cold, more exhausted. But finally, he heard it, the luxury sedan's engine turning over, catching, roaring to life. "Yes!" Evan shouted into the storm, pumping his fist like Maddie did when she won at Connect 4. He disconnected the cables, secured both hoods, then jogged back to his car, where Maren was watching through the windshield with an expression he couldn't quite read. Evan collapsed into the driver's seat, dripping water everywhere, breathing hard. "You're a miracle worker," Maren said softly. "I thought I'd be stuck there all night." "Just basic car maintenance," Evan replied, trying to catch his breath. "Your battery should hold now, but you'll want to get it checked tomorrow. And those terminals really need proper cleaning when you're somewhere dry." Maren was staring at him with an intensity that made Evan uncomfortable, like she was trying to memorize his face, or maybe figure him out. "What?" he asked, suddenly self-conscious about his soaked work clothes and the exhaustion he knew showed on his face. "You stopped," she said simply. "In this storm, after midnight. You stopped to help someone you didn't know." Evan shrugged again, uncomfortable with the gratitude in her voice. "Couldn't just leave you there. Most people would have." "Then most people are assholes," Evan said, then immediately winced. "Sorry. I mean..." But Maren laughed. Actually laughed. This bright, genuine sound that seemed impossible in the middle of a raging storm. "No, you're right. Most people are." She reached for her purse, expensive leather, probably worth more than Evan's entire wardrobe, and pulled out a wallet. "Please, let me pay you. For your time, for the supplies." "No," Evan said immediately, holding up his hand. "No, please, I don't want money." "But you must have somewhere to be. I've kept you out in this weather, and I was just heading home. It's fine." Maren studied him again with those searching eyes. "You're something rare, Evan. You know that?" The words made Evan's throat tight. If only she knew. If only she knew that in 72 hours, this rare man might be convicted of felony theft and sent to prison for 5 years. "I should go," he said abruptly, starting his car. "You should get home, too. Roads are only getting worse." "Wait." Maren pulled out a business card from her purse. "Please, take this. If you ever need anything, if there's ever any way I can repay this kindness..." "I don't need anything," Evan said, but she was already pressing the card into his hand. He glanced down at it in the dim light from his dashboard. The lettering was embossed, elegant. Judge Maren Caldwell. Superior Court. Evan's heart stuttered. A judge. He'd just helped a judge. You're a judge? He said stupidly. Marin nodded, wringing water from her hair. I am, which makes what you did tonight even more meaningful. I see a lot of humanity in my courtroom, Evan. Not always the good kind, but you— She paused, choosing her words carefully. You restored some faith tonight. Evan wanted to laugh, or cry, or scream. Here he was, 3 days from facing a judge himself, and he'd randomly stopped to help one on a highway. The universe had a twisted sense of humor. I should really go, he said again, his voice strained. My daughter's waiting. You have a daughter? Marin's face softened. How old? 8. Maddie. She's everything. Something passed across Marin's face. Understanding? Sympathy? Evan couldn't tell. Then you should definitely get home to her, Marin said gently. Thank you again, Evan. Truly. You have no idea what this meant. You have no idea what I'm about to face, Evan thought, but didn't say. They said their goodbyes, and Evan waited until Marin's luxury sedan pulled safely back onto the highway before following. They drove in the same direction for a few miles before she turned off toward what Evan assumed was a much nicer neighborhood than his own. He dropped the business card in his cup holder and tried not to think about judges or courtrooms or the 72 hours that stood between him and potential disaster. By the time Evan pulled into his apartment complex, a squat, tired building with flickering lights in the parking lot and graffiti on the dumpsters, it was nearly 1 a.m. He was soaked, exhausted, and somehow more scared than before. Mrs. Kowalski's light was still on. Evan knocked softly, and she opened immediately. Her kind, wrinkled face creased with concern. Oh, Evan, you look half drowned. What happened? Just the storm, he said, managing a smile. Bad night to work late. Well, come in, dry off. I will, I promise. How was Maddie? An angel, as always. We read 3 chapters of that dragon book she loves, and she fell asleep around 9:30. Mrs. Kowalski tilted her head, studying him. You work too hard, dear. If only you knew, Evan thought, if only you knew I might not be able to work at all in 3 days. He thanked Mrs. Kowalski, retrieved Maddie, a warm sleeping bundle that he carried carefully to their apartment, and tucked her into bed. She stirred slightly, mumbling something about dragons and ice cream, then settled back into deep sleep. Evan stood there for a long moment, watching her breathe. Her dark hair fanned across the pillow, her small hand curled around Mr. Whiskers, her face so peaceful, so innocent, so completely unaware that her entire world might shatter on Monday morning. I won't let them take me from you, Evan whispered, his voice breaking. I promise, baby girl. I promise. But as he stumbled to his own bedroom, barely more than a closet with a mattress, and collapsed onto the thin sheets fully clothed, Evan wasn't sure it was a promise he could keep. The storm raged outside. Inside, another storm raged in his chest. And in 72 hours, everything would change. The weekend passed in a blur of terror and forced normalcy. Saturday morning, Evan made pancakes with Maddie, letting her crack the eggs even though half the shell ended up in the batter. They went to the park despite the lingering clouds from Friday's storm, and he pushed her on the swings until his arms ached and she was laughing so hard she couldn't breathe. Higher, Daddy, higher! Any higher and you'll fly away, Evan said. But he pushed harder anyway, storing up these moments like ammunition against the darkness coming. Saturday night, they built a blanket fort in the living room and watched Maddie's favorite animated movie about a girl who finds a magical fox. Maddie fell asleep halfway through, curled against Evan's side, and he couldn't bring himself to move her to her bed. He just sat there, feeling her heartbeat against his ribs, memorizing the weight of her. 72 hours has become 48, he thought. Then 36. Then 24. Sunday was harder. Evan tried to do normal things, laundry, grocery shopping, helping Maddie with her math homework, but his hands kept shaking. His mind kept drifting to Monday morning, to the courtroom, to the judge who would decide his fate. Judge. Evan pulled Judge Marin Caldwell's business card from his wallet, where he'd tucked it Saturday morning. Embossed lettering. Superior Court. The same woman he'd helped in the storm now felt like a symbol of everything he was about to face. Who's that? Maddie asked, peering over his shoulder at the card. Just someone I met, Evan said, quickly tucking it away. Nobody important. But it says judge. Is she important? Probably to someone, Evan replied, his chest tight. Come on, let's finish your math problems. That night, after Maddie was asleep, Evan sat at their tiny kitchen table with a cup of instant coffee and the case files Patricia had given him, page after page of evidence. His employee ID used to access accounts. His computer login tied to suspicious transactions. Timestamps that painted him as a thief. Except he wasn't. He'd never stolen anything in his life. The closest he'd come to crime was accidentally walking out of a grocery store once without paying for a candy bar Maddie had hidden in his coat pocket, and he'd gone back in immediately to pay. But Victor Hale was smart. Victor Hale was rich. Victor Hale had the kind of lawyers who knew how to build cases that looked airtight, even when they were built on lies. Evan's phone buzzed. Patricia Chen. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Arrive by 8:30. Wear the suit. Try to get sleep. We'll do our best. We'll do our best. Not we'll win. Not don't worry. Just we'll do our best. Evan put his head down on the case files and tried not to cry. Monday morning arrived with cruel sunshine. Evan woke at 5 a.m., his heart already racing. He showered, shaved carefully, put on the suit he'd borrowed from a coworker, slightly too tight in the shoulders, slightly too loose in the waist, but it was better than anything he owned. He knotted the tie 3 times before getting it right, his hands shaking so badly he could barely manage it. At 7, he woke Maddie. Morning, sunshine, he said, forcing brightness into his voice. Big day at school today? Math test, Maddie mumbled, rubbing her eyes. I studied, though. I'm going to get 100%. That's my girl. He made her favorite breakfast, cinnamon toast with chocolate milk, and helped her pack her backpack. Every movement felt weighted with significance. Every moment felt like it might be his last with her for 5 years. Daddy, you're wearing a fancy suit, Maddie observed, studying him with those sharp 8-year-old eyes that never missed anything. How come? Just a meeting, Evan said, his throat tight. Work stuff. Oh. She went back to her toast, swinging her legs under the table. Then, Daddy? Yeah, baby. Are we okay? Like, is everything okay? Evan's heart cracked. He crouched beside her chair, taking her small hands in his. Everything is okay? I promise. I love you more than anything in the world. You know that, right? I know. Maddie smiled, revealing the gap where she'd lost a tooth last week. I love you too, more than dragons. More than dragons? Evan pretended to gasp. That's a lot. He walked her to the bus stop, hugged her maybe a second too long, and watched the yellow bus pull away with his entire world inside it. Then he got in his car and drove to the courthouse. Superior Court was an imposing building, all marble and columns, and the kind of architecture designed to make you feel small. Evan parked in the public lot, paid the ridiculous fee, and walked inside on legs that barely supported him. Patricia was waiting in the hallway outside courtroom 4B. She looked tired, her suit rumpled, her expression grim. You ready? She asked. No, Evan said honestly. Good answer. Nobody ever is. She checked her watch. We have 10 minutes. The prosecution is pushing hard on this, Evan. Victor Hale wants to make an example of you. I didn't steal that money. I know, but proving it... Patricia trailed off, her eyes sympathetic. Just stay calm in there. Answer questions directly. Don't let them rattle you. They entered the courtroom together, and Evan's stomach dropped. It was exactly like on TV, but somehow worse. Wooden benches filled with people. The jury box empty, but waiting. The judge's bench elevated and imposing. The American flag hanging beside the state flag. Everything formal and final and terrifying. Evan took his seat at the defense table, his borrowed suit suddenly feeling suffocating. The prosecution team was already there, 3 lawyers in expensive suits, all of them looking confident and ruthless. Behind them, in the gallery, sat Victor Hale. Evan's former boss looked perfect, of course. Silver hair styled immaculately, designer glasses, a suit that probably cost more than Evan's car. And when Victor caught Evan's eye, he smiled. Not a nice smile, a victorious smile. The smile of a man who knew he'd already won. Evan's hands curled into fists under the table. "All rise!" The bailiff's voice boomed through the courtroom. Everyone stood. Evan's legs were shaking so badly he thought he might fall. The Honorable Judge Marin Caldwell presiding, and Evan's entire world stopped. No, 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 no! Judge Marin Caldwell entered from the side door in full judicial robes, carrying a file, her expression professional and composed. She walked to the bench with calm authority, took her seat, and looked out over the courtroom. Her eyes found Evan's, and for one fraction of a second, so brief that Evan almost thought he imagined it, her professional composure cracked. Her eyes widened, her breath caught. Recognition flashed across her face like lightning. The woman from the storm. The judge who would decide his fate. The same person. Evan's vision blurred at the edges. His heart was hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. This couldn't be happening. The odds were, what? Astronomical? This was... "Please be seated," Judge Caldwell said, her voice perfectly controlled now, perfectly professional. If she recognized him, she gave no further sign of it. But Evan had seen that flicker, that split-second shock. She knew exactly who he was, and he had no idea if that was a blessing or a curse. The trial had begun. The courtroom felt like it was closing in on Evan, the air too thick to breathe, the walls too close. He couldn't tear his eyes away from Judge Caldwell, searching for any sign that she remembered him, that she knew who he was. But her face had settled back into that mask of judicial neutrality, completely unreadable. Patricia leaned close to his ear, whispering, "Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," Evan managed, though his voice came out strangled. "Just nervous." "That's normal. Just breathe." But how could he breathe when the woman sitting 15 feet away, elevated on that imposing bench, was the same woman he'd helped in the rain 4 nights ago? The same woman whose car he'd fixed, whose gratitude had been so genuine, who told him he was something rare. Judge Caldwell was organizing papers on her bench, her movements precise and controlled. She glanced at the prosecution table, then at the defense, her gaze sliding over Evan as if he were just another defendant in just another case. Maybe she didn't remember. Maybe helping stranded motorists was so common for her that one rainy night had already blurred into obscurity. Maybe... "The State versus Evan Michael Ross," Judge Caldwell read from her file, her voice clear and authoritative. "Case number 2024 CR 8847. Charges of embezzlement in the first degree, theft of property exceeding $40,000, and fraudulent use of company computer systems." Each word felt like a hammer blow. Evan's borrowed suit was suffocating him. The tie was too tight. Everything was too tight. "Counselors, are both sides ready to proceed?" Judge Caldwell asked. The lead prosecutor stood, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the predatory confidence of someone who'd won hundreds of cases. "The prosecution is ready, Your Honor." Patricia rose beside Evan, and he could feel the tension in her body. "The defense is ready, Your Honor." "Very well. Before we proceed with jury selection, I want to review the evidence submissions. Prosecution, you may present your exhibits for authentication." The prosecutor, her name was Elizabeth Townsend, Evan remembered from the pre-trial documents, approached the bench with a thick folder. "Your Honor, the state wishes to enter into evidence exhibits A through M, including financial records, computer access logs, security footage, and witness depositions." Judge Caldwell took the folder and began examining the contents. Evan watched her face, desperate for any reaction, any sign. But she was stone, professional, distant. Minutes ticked by. The courtroom was silent except for the rustle of papers and the occasional cough from the gallery. Evan's hands were sweating. He wiped them on his pants, then immediately worried that someone had seen, that it made him look guilty. "Your Honor," Patricia said, standing again, "the defense would like to request additional time to review the prosecution's digital evidence. Some of these exhibits were only provided to us last week, and given the technical nature of..." "Objection," Townsend interrupted smoothly. "The defense has had ample time to review all materials. This is a delay tactic." "It's not a delay tactic when the prosecution dumps 200 pages of technical documents on us 7 days before trial," Patricia shot back, her frustration showing through. Judge Caldwell held up one hand, silencing them both. She was still studying the documents, her brow slightly furrowed. Evan leaned forward unconsciously, trying to read her expression. Finally, she looked up. Her eyes found Evan's for just a moment, less than a second, and he saw it again. That flicker of recognition, that hint of something deeper than judicial impartiality. Then it was gone. "Ms. Townsend," Judge Caldwell said, her voice measured, "these financial documents you've submitted as Exhibit C through G, are these certified copies or originals?" Townsend hesitated. Just barely, but Evan saw it. "They are copies, Your Honor, obtained directly from Hale Industries' accounting system." "I see. And have they been authenticated by a forensic accountant?" "They were reviewed by the company's internal auditing team." "That's not what I asked." Judge Caldwell's voice sharpened slightly. "Have these documents been independently verified by a certified forensic examiner?" Another hesitation. "Not yet, Your Honor, but..." "And these computer access logs in Exhibit J?" Judge Caldwell held up several pages, her expression neutral but her tone pointed. "These show Mr. Ross's employee ID and login credentials accessing restricted accounts. But I see no metadata verification, no IP address confirmation, no documentation of who actually performed these actions." "Your Honor, the defendant's credentials were used. That establishes..." "It establishes that credentials were used, Ms. Townsend, not necessarily by whom." Judge Caldwell set the papers down with more force than necessary. "In an era where credential theft and spoofing are commonplace, surely the prosecution understands that employee ID and password use alone does not definitively establish identity." Evan's heart was suddenly pounding for a different reason. Was Judge Caldwell helping him, or was she just being thorough? Patricia seized the moment. "Your Honor, the defense has been arguing exactly this point. Without forensic authentication of these digital records, without independent verification that Mr. Ross himself performed these actions rather than someone using his stolen credentials, this evidence is circumstantial at best." "It's more than circumstantial," Townsend argued, her confidence wavering. "We have timestamps. We have access patterns consistent with Mr. Ross's work schedule. We have..." "Patterns are not proof," Judge Caldwell interrupted. "They're indicators, and indicators require authentication." She leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled together. "Here's what we're going to do. The prosecution will have these financial documents and digital records submitted for independent forensic examination. I want them reviewed by a certified examiner with no connection to either Hale Industries or the defendant." "Your Honor, that could take weeks," Townsend protested. "Then it takes weeks. I will not allow potentially unreliable evidence to form the foundation of a criminal case in my courtroom." Judge Caldwell's voice was firm, final. "This court stands in recess pending forensic authentication. We will reconvene in 3 weeks." She slammed the gavel down with authority that seemed to shake the entire room. "All rise." Evan stood on shaking legs, his mind reeling. 3 weeks. She'd just bought him 3 weeks. Why? Was it because she recognized him? Because she remembered him from the storm? Or was this just standard judicial procedure? Judge Caldwell gathered her papers and exited through the side door without looking back. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Patricia grabbed Evan's arm, her eyes wide with surprise. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God, Evan, she just threw their entire case into question." "What does this mean?" Evan's voice was hoarse. "It means we have time. It means if those documents don't hold up to forensic scrutiny, the prosecution's case falls apart." Patricia was practically vibrating with cautious optimism. "I've never seen a judge demand independent authentication on the first day. Never." Evan turned to look at the prosecution table. Townsend was in heated discussion with her team, her face flushed. And behind them, Victor Hale sat frozen, his confident smile completely gone. Their eyes met across the courtroom. Victor's expression shifted to something darker, something threatening. "You think you've won," his eyes seemed to say. "You haven't." Then Victor stood and walked out, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor like a countdown. Evan's temporary relief evaporated. 3 weeks wasn't salvation. It was just a delay. And if Victor had been willing to frame him once, what would he do now that his plan was threatened? Patricia was already pulling Evan toward the exit. Come on, we need to discuss strategy, figure out what to do with these 3 weeks. But Evan couldn't stop thinking about Judge Caldwell, about the way she'd studied those documents, about how she'd questioned every piece of evidence with surgical precision, about whether she was helping him because of one rainy night, or if this was just how she always operated. They made it to the hallway, and Patricia immediately launched into planning mode. We need to hire our own forensic examiner, see if we can prove those credentials were compromised. We need to subpoena Hale Industries' full security protocols, find out who else had access to Ms. Chen? They both turned. A young clerk from the courtroom stood there, holding an envelope. Judge Caldwell asked me to give this to the defense. Patricia took it, frowning. What is it? A list of court-approved forensic examiners. The judge wants both sides to select one by the end of the week. The clerk glanced at Evan, then back to Patricia. She also said to tell you that she expects full documentation of any evidence gathered during the recess period. The clerk left. Patricia opened the envelope and pulled out several pages. This is good, she said, scanning the list. Really good. Some of these examiners are top tier. If we can get Dr. Sarah Mitchell, she's testified in federal cases, exposed fraudulent documentation in 3 major corporate trials. Patricia, Evan interrupted, his voice strained. Why is Judge Caldwell doing this? Doing what? Helping us. Questioning everything. Buying us time. Patricia looked at him like he was crazy. She's not helping us, Evan. She's doing her job. A good judge doesn't just accept whatever evidence the prosecution hands over. They scrutinize it. They make sure it's legitimate. But you said you'd never seen a judge demand authentication on day 1. I haven't. But that doesn't mean it's inappropriate. Judge Caldwell has a reputation for being incredibly thorough. Some lawyers love her, some hate her, but everyone respects her. Patricia folded the papers and tucked them back in the envelope. We got lucky with the judge assignment, Evan. That's all this is. Luck. But Evan couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than luck. That somewhere in Judge Marin Caldwell's decision to question the evidence was the memory of a man who'd stopped in the rain to help a stranger. He wanted to believe it, desperately wanted to believe that one act of kindness could somehow ripple forward and save him, but he'd learned the hard way that the world didn't work like that. They spent another hour in a courthouse conference room, Patricia outlining everything they needed to do in the next 3 weeks. Contact the forensic examiners on the list, gather any evidence of credential theft, document Evan's whereabouts during the times the fraudulent transactions occurred, build a timeline, build a defense. By the time Evan left the courthouse, it was past noon. He sat in his car for a long moment, hands on the steering wheel, trying to process everything that had just happened. 3 weeks. He had 3 weeks before everything started again. 3 weeks to find proof of his innocence. 3 weeks with Maddie. His phone buzzed. Mrs. Kowalski. How did your meeting go, dear? Meeting? Right, that's what he'd told everyone. Just a work meeting. Fine. Everything's fine. I'll pick up Maddie from school today. Wonderful. She'll be so happy. Evan started the car and drove toward Maddie's school, his mind still spinning with thoughts of judges and evidence and rainy nights that felt like they'd happened in a different lifetime. The elementary school was a cheerful building covered in student artwork and motivational posters. Evan parked and waited by the pickup zone, watching other parents gather. Some were chatting, laughing. Some were on their phones. All of them looked normal. None of them looked like their entire lives were hanging by a thread. The bell rang. Within minutes, kids poured out in a chaotic flood of backpacks and laughter. And there was Maddie, her dark ponytail bouncing as she ran toward him. Daddy, you picked me up! She launched herself into his arms. You never pick me up on Monday. Special day, Evan said, hugging her tight. How was the math test? Super easy. I definitely got 100%. She pulled back, studying his face with those 2 perceptive eyes. How was your meeting? It was good. Really good, actually. Good enough for ice cream? Evan laughed despite everything. Yeah, sunshine. Good enough for ice cream. They went to the small ice cream shop near their apartment, the kind with mismatched chairs and handwritten flavor signs. Maddie got her usual chocolate chip cookie dough. Evan got vanilla because it was cheapest. So, what was the meeting about? Maddie asked, swinging her legs under the table. Just work stuff. Boring adult things. Oh. She took a huge bite of ice cream, getting it all over her nose. Are you still sad? Evan's spoon froze halfway to his mouth. Sad? You've been sad for a while. Not like crying sad, but like worried sad. I can tell. God, she was 8 and she could read him better than anyone. Evan set down his spoon and reached across the table to take her small hand. I have been worried about some things, he admitted carefully. But you know what makes it better? What? Coming home to you every single day. That's the best part of my whole life, Maddie. You are. She grinned, ice cream stained and beautiful. Even better than dragons? Even better than dragons. They finished their ice cream and walked home in the late afternoon sunshine. Maddie chattered about school, about her friend Emma who could do a cartwheel, about the class hamster who'd escaped and been found in the art supply closet. Normal, wonderful 8-year-old concerns. And Evan tried to focus on her voice, on this moment, on the feeling of her hand in his. He tried not to think about courtrooms and evidence and the next 3 weeks that would determine everything. That night, after dinner and homework and bath time and 2 chapters of the Dragon Book, after Maddie was asleep with Mr. Whiskers tucked under her chin, Evan sat alone in the dark living room and pulled out Judge Caldwell's business card again. The embossed letters caught the light from the street lamp outside. Judge Marin Caldwell. Superior Court. He should probably throw it away. Having it felt wrong somehow, like he was holding on to something he shouldn't, but he couldn't make himself do it. Instead, he found himself replaying that moment in the courtroom, the way her eyes had met his, the way her professional mask had cracked for just a fraction of a second, the way she'd torn apart the prosecution's evidence with precision that felt almost personal. Did she recognize me? Does she remember? Evan's phone buzzed. Unknown number. His heart rate spiked. Who called at 10 p.m.? But he answered anyway. Hello? Evan Ross? The voice was male, smooth, familiar in a way that made Evan's skin crawl. Who is this? Victor Hale. I think we should talk. Evan's hand tightened on the phone. I have nothing to say to you. I disagree. You see that little stunt in court today, that delay? It's not going to change anything. I have evidence, I have witnesses, I have everything I need to put you away. Then why are you calling me? A pause. Then, because I'm a reasonable man, Evan, I'm willing to offer you a deal. Plead guilty to a reduced charge, say misdemeanor theft, and I'll recommend a sentence of probation. No jail time. You keep your daughter. Everyone moves on. I didn't steal anything. That's not what the evidence says. The evidence is fake and you know it. Evan's voice rose, years of suppressed rage finally breaking through. You framed me. I don't know why. I don't know what I did to deserve this, but you framed me for a crime I didn't commit. Victor's voice went cold. Careful, Evan. Accusations like that could get you in even more trouble. I'm already in trouble. You've destroyed my life. No, you destroyed your life when you decided to steal from me. Now I'm offering you a way out. Take the deal, plead guilty, serve probation, or go to trial and lose everything. Your freedom, your daughter, any chance at a normal life. You're lying. The judge is requiring forensic authentication. When those experts examine your fake evidence, you think one judge's delay changes anything? Victor laughed, and it was a cruel sound. You think Judge Caldwell is going to save you? She's following procedure, Evan. That's all. Once those examiners confirm what I already know, that you're guilty, you'll be convicted, and then I'll make sure you get the maximum sentence. Why are you doing this? Evan's voice cracked. What did I ever do to you? The line went quiet for a long moment. When Victor spoke again, his voice was eerily calm. You were in the wrong place at the wrong time, Evan. You saw things you shouldn't have seen, and now you're a liability. This isn't personal. It's business. What things? I don't even know what you're talking about. Don't you? Think back to 3 months ago. Think about that night you worked late. Think about what you might have walked past, might have overheard, might have seen on a computer screen you shouldn't have been near. Evan's mind raced. 3 months ago. Late night at the warehouse. He'd been doing inventory, walking through the offices to, oh God, Victor's office. The door had been open, unusual for that late at night. Evan had walked past, had glanced in just briefly, had seen Victor at his computer, moving money between accounts, while on the phone saying something about offshore transfers and before the audit. At the time, Evan hadn't thought anything of it. It was none of his business. He'd kept walking, but Victor had seen him walk past. "You're embezzling," Evan whispered, the realization hitting him like ice water. "That's what this is about. You're stealing from your own company, and you needed a scapegoat." "I'm not going to confirm or deny anything on a recorded line," Victor said smoothly, "but I will say this. You have 48 hours to take my deal. After that, it's off the table. Plead guilty to misdemeanor theft, get probation, and we both move on. Or fight this and lose everything. Your choice." The line went dead. Evan sat there in the dark, phone still pressed to his ear, his whole body shaking. It all made sense now, why Victor had turned on him so suddenly, why the evidence seemed so perfectly constructed, why a man who'd once called Evan reliable and trustworthy was now determined to see him imprisoned. Because Evan had accidentally witnessed Victor's crime, and Victor needed him silenced. But how could Evan prove it? He had no evidence, no documentation, nothing except a memory of walking past an open office door 3 months ago. Against Victor's money and lawyers and manufactured evidence, that memory was worthless. Evan looked at Judge Caldwell's business card again, still sitting on the coffee table. Should he call her, tell her what Victor had just said? Would she even believe him? No, he couldn't. Contacting a judge directly about an active case was probably illegal. And even if it wasn't, it would look like he was trying to manipulate her, trying to use that night in the rain for his own benefit. He was trapped, completely, utterly trapped. The next morning, Evan told Patricia everything about Victor's call. They met at a coffee shop far from the courthouse, both of them hunched over cheap coffee and Patricia's case notes. "He's trying to scare you," Patricia said, but her face was grim. "The offer of a plea deal means he's worried about the forensic examination. Or it means he's confident he can beat it and wants to save himself the trouble of a trial. Evan, listen to me. Do not take that deal. You didn't commit this crime. Taking a plea, even for a misdemeanor, means accepting responsibility for theft. It goes on your record forever. It affects employment, housing, everything. But if I lose at trial, we're not going to lose." Patricia's voice was fierce. "Judge Caldwell bought us time for a reason. We're going to use every second of these 3 weeks to build your defense." "What if it's not enough?" Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Then it has to be enough, because the alternative is unacceptable." They spent the morning contacting forensic examiners from Judge Caldwell's list. Dr. Sarah Mitchell agreed to take the case, her fees discounted because she said the evidence looked fishy from Patricia's description. That was something, at least. But Evan couldn't shake the weight pressing on his chest, couldn't shake Victor's voice on the phone. "You think Judge Caldwell is going to save you?" The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of investigation and anxiety. Dr. Mitchell requested all the digital evidence from the prosecution. Patricia filed motions, gathered documentation of Evan's whereabouts, interviewed coworkers who swore Evan would never steal. Evan kept working at the warehouse. Different shifts now, avoiding Victor's office, avoiding Victor himself. He picked Maddie up from school every day, helped with homework, read bedtime stories. He tried to be normal, tried to be present, tried not to let her see how terrified he was. At night, alone in the dark, he sometimes took out Judge Caldwell's business card and wondered if she ever thought about that rainy night, wondered if she knew he was the same man, wondered if it even mattered. On the 15th day of the recess, Patricia called with news. "Doctor, Mitchell found something," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "The metadata on those financial documents? It's been altered. Timestamps don't match up with the system logs. Someone backdated transactions to make it look like they occurred when you were working, but the actual entries were made from an IP address registered to Victor Hale's home office." Evan's heart stopped. "What does that mean?" "It means we can prove the evidence is fabricated. It means we can show the jury that someone else created these documents and tried to frame you." Patricia was talking fast now, energized. "But there's more. Dr. Mitchell also found deleted files in the company's backup servers, transactions that show Victor moving money between accounts right before the alleged embezzlement. He was covering his tracks and needed a scapegoat." "Can she testify to this in court?" "Yes." "And Evan?" Her findings are damning. If Judge Caldwell sees this report, there's a very real chance she'll dismiss the charges entirely before we even get to trial. For the first time in months, Evan felt something that might have been hope. When do we present this? At the reconvened hearing next Monday, we'll submit Dr. Mitchell's report to the judge and— No. Victor's voice cut through the coffee shop noise. Evan spun around. Victor Hale stood 3 feet away, his face twisted with rage, barely concealed behind a tight smile. How long had he been standing there? I need to call you back, Evan said to Patricia, hanging up. You think you're clever, Victor said quietly, stepping closer. You think some forensic report is going to save you? I think the truth is going to save me. The truth? Victor laughed, cold and sharp. The truth is whatever I say it is. I own half the judges in this city. I have connections you can't imagine. One forensic report means nothing. It means everything if it proves you framed me. Victor's smile disappeared entirely. You're going to regret not taking my deal, Evan. By the time I'm done with you, you'll lose everything. Your freedom, your daughter, your life. Are you threatening me? I'm promising you. Victor leaned in close enough that Evan could smell his expensive cologne. And one more thing, that judge of yours, Marin Caldwell, I know people who know her. I can make her life very difficult if she continues to obstruct this case. Evan's blood ran cold. You can't. I can do whatever I want. I'm Victor Hale, and you're nobody. Victor straightened his suit jacket. See you in court Monday. Try to enjoy these last few days of freedom. He walked away, leaving Evan standing there shaking with rage and fear. That night, Evan couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Victor's threats, thinking about Judge Caldwell and whether she was in danger now too, thinking about Maddie asleep in the next room and what would happen to her if he lost. At 3 a.m., he got up and went to the kitchen. Judge Caldwell's business card was still on the counter where he'd left it, the embossed letters barely visible in the dark. He should call her, warn her, tell her that Victor was planning to come after her somehow. But he couldn't. It was inappropriate. It could jeopardize the case. It could make everything worse. Instead, Evan made himself a cup of coffee and sat at the table until sunrise, watching the darkness give way to light and praying that Dr. Mitchell's report would be enough to save them all. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that felt almost cruel. The sky was impossibly blue, the air crisp with the promise of spring, and Evan felt like he was walking to his own execution. He'd barely slept in 3 days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Victor's face, heard those threats echoing in his mind. Patricia had assured him that Dr. Mitchell's report was solid, that the evidence would speak for itself, but Evan had learned the hard way that justice and truth didn't always align. Maddie had sensed something was wrong that morning. She'd clung to him at the bus stop, her small arms wrapped around his waist. Daddy, you promise you'll be here when I get home? The question had nearly broken him. I promise, Sunshine. I'll be right here. Pinky promise? He'd linked his pinky with hers, fighting back tears. Pinky promise. Now standing outside courtroom 4B again, wearing the same borrowed suit that felt like a costume, Evan tried to remember how to breathe. Patricia stood beside him, clutching her briefcase like a shield, her expression set with determination. Dr. Mitchell's report is irrefutable, she said for the 3rd time that morning. The metadata proves the documents were fabricated. The deleted files show Victor's actual embezzlement. Judge Caldwell is going to see through this entire setup. Victor said he has connections, that he could make things difficult for her. Patricia's jaw tightened. Victor Hale can threaten all he wants. Judge Caldwell has been on the bench for 12 years and has a reputation for being incorruptible. She doesn't bow to pressure from wealthy defendants or their allies. How do you know? Because I've been practicing law in this county for 8 years, and I've seen her handle cases involving people far more powerful than Victor Hale. She doesn't flinch. Patricia adjusted her glasses, a nervous habit Evan had learned to recognize. Trust the system, Evan. For once, trust that it might actually work. The courtroom doors opened. They filed in with the others, journalists who'd caught wind that something interesting was happening, a few curious law students, and Victor Hale with his army of expensive lawyers looking supremely confident despite everything. Evan took his seat at the defense table, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. The prosecution team was already reviewing their notes, whispering among themselves. Elizabeth Townsend kept glancing at Patricia's briefcase, probably wondering what bombshell they were about to drop. "All rise!" The bailiff's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. Everyone stood. Evan's legs felt like they might give out. Judge Maren Caldwell entered, her black robes flowing behind her, her expression as professionally neutral as before. She took her seat at the bench, organized her papers with precise movements, and surveyed the courtroom with those sharp brown eyes. When her gaze landed on Evan, he searched desperately for any sign of recognition, any hint that she remembered him. But her face remained impassive, unreadable. "Please be seated," she said. "We're here to review the results of the forensic examination ordered by this court 3 weeks ago. I've received reports from both the prosecution's expert and the defense's expert. I've reviewed them thoroughly." She paused, her fingers steepled on the bench. "And I have significant concerns about the evidence presented in this case." A ripple went through the courtroom. Evan's heart began to pound. Townsend stood quickly. "Your Honor, the prosecution's forensic examiner confirmed the authenticity of—" "I read your examiner's report, Ms. Townsend. I also read Dr. Sarah Mitchell's report for the defense, which directly contradicts your findings." Judge Caldwell's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "Dr. Mitchell has provided documentation showing that the metadata on the financial records submitted as evidence has been altered, timestamps have been manipulated, digital signatures have been backdated." "Your Honor, we dispute those findings." "On what grounds?" Judge Caldwell leaned forward slightly. "Dr. Mitchell is a certified forensic examiner with 20 years of experience and has testified in federal cases. Her credentials are impeccable. Unless you can provide specific technical rebuttals to her findings, disputing them is merely rhetoric." Townsend's face flushed. She glanced at her team, clearly thrown. "Your Honor, we would need time to have our experts review Dr. Mitchell's methodology. You've had 3 weeks, the same 3 weeks the defense had." Judge Caldwell picked up a document from her desk. "I'm going to read directly from Dr. Mitchell's report, and I want you to listen carefully, Miss Townsend, because what I'm about to describe constitutes potential evidence tampering." The courtroom went absolutely silent. Evan couldn't breathe. Judge Caldwell began to read, her voice clear and damning. "According to Dr. Mitchell's analysis, the financial documents in question, specifically Exhibits C through G, contain metadata inconsistencies that indicate post-creation alteration. The timestamps showing when these transactions allegedly occurred do not match the actual file creation dates in the system logs. Furthermore, the IP addresses associated with these transactions do not correspond to any workstation assigned to the defendant, Evan Ross. Instead, they trace back to a residential address registered to Victor Hale, the alleged victim in this case." Gasps echoed through the gallery. Evan's head swam. Patricia grabbed his arm, squeezing hard. Victor's lawyers erupted in protest. "Your Honor, this is outrageous." "I'm not finished," Judge Caldwell said sharply, silencing them with a look. Dr. Mitchell's report goes on to detail deleted files recovered from Hale Industries' backup servers. These files show unauthorized transfers of company funds to offshore accounts, conducted using administrative credentials belonging to Victor Hale himself, occurring in the weeks immediately preceding the alleged embezzlement by Mr. Ross. The courtroom exploded. Journalists scrambled for their phones. Law students whispered frantically. Victor Hale sat frozen, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. "Order!" Judge Caldwell's gavel cracked like thunder. "Order in this court!" The noise subsided. Townsend looked like she'd been struck. She turned to look at Victor, then back at the judge, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Judge Caldwell continued, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Ms. Townsend, the evidence your office has presented in this case appears to have been fabricated. The defendant's credentials were likely stolen and used to create a false trail implicating him in crimes he did not commit. Meanwhile, the actual perpetrator of embezzlement appears to be the man sitting behind you. Your Honor," one of Victor's lawyers stood, his face red. "These are wild accusations based on speculation. They're based on forensic evidence that you've failed to refute." Judge Caldwell's gaze shifted to Victor. Mr. Hale, I suggest you retain criminal defense counsel, because based on what I'm seeing, the district attorney's office will likely be filing charges against you. Victor shot to his feet. This is absurd. I'm the victim here. That man. He pointed at Evan with a shaking finger. That man stole from my company. Sit down, Mr. Hale, Judge Caldwell said coldly. I will not sit down while my character is assassinated based on some hired experts. Sit down. Judge Caldwell's voice dropped to something dangerous. Or I will hold you in contempt of this court. Victor's lawyers physically pulled him back into his seat. His face was purple with rage, his hands clenched into fists. Judge Caldwell turned her attention back to the prosecution. Miss Townsend, I'm giving you one opportunity to explain how your office failed to properly vet this evidence before bringing charges against Mr. Ross. Townsend looked stricken. Your Honor, we relied on the documentation provided by Hale Industries. We had no reason to believe so. You had every reason to believe, Judge Caldwell interrupted. It's your job to verify evidence, not simply accept what's handed to you by alleged victims, especially when the alleged victim is a wealthy businessman with considerable motivation to cover his own crimes. She paused, letting that sink in. Your office brought charges against an innocent man, Ms. Townsend, a single father working double shifts to support his daughter. You nearly sent him to prison for 5 years based on evidence you didn't properly authenticate. Evan's vision blurred. Tears were streaming down his face before he could stop them. Patricia's hand found his under the table, squeezing tightly. Your Honor, Townsend said, her voice barely above a whisper. In light of these findings, the prosecution moves to dismiss all charges against Evan Ross. Motion granted. Judge Caldwell's gavel came down with finality. All charges against Evan Michael Ross are hereby dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Ross, you're free to go. The courtroom erupted again. Evan couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't process what had just happened. Free. He was free. Maddie wouldn't lose him. Patricia was hugging him, laughing and crying at the same time. You're free, Evan. It's over. But Judge Caldwell wasn't finished. Her voice cut through the celebration, cold and commanding. Furthermore, I'm ordering the immediate impoundment of all financial records from Hale Industries. Ms. Townsend, I expect your office to open a criminal investigation into Victor Hale for embezzlement, evidence tampering, and filing false police reports. She fixed Victor with a stare that could have frozen fire. Mr. Hale, you are ordered to surrender your passport to this court immediately. You are not to leave the state pending investigation. Victor's lead attorney stood. Your Honor, my client has significant business interests that require... I don't care about his business interests. He's a flight risk with offshore accounts and apparent connections to international money laundering. Passport. Now. Victor stood slowly, his movements controlled but his eyes burning with hatred. He looked at Evan, and the rage in that gaze was so intense Evan actually flinched. This isn't over, Victor said quietly. The words meant only for Evan. Mr. Hale, if you're threatening a witness, I will have you arrested immediately, Judge Caldwell said sharply. Victor's smile was cold. No threat, Your Honor, simply a fact. He pulled his passport from his jacket and handed it to the bailiff. I look forward to clearing my name. I'm sure you do. Bailiff, ensure Mr. Hale's passport is secured. Judge Caldwell gathered her papers. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell one last time, and suddenly people were everywhere. Journalists pushing forward, shouting questions. Law students discussing the case. Patricia fielding inquiries from reporters while trying to shield Evan from the chaos. Through it all, Evan's eyes found Judge Caldwell. She was standing now, preparing to exit through the side door, her expression carefully neutral. But for just a moment, less than a heartbeat, she looked at him. And she smiled. It was tiny, barely there, the kind of smile you might miss if you weren't watching for it. But it was there, real, warm. The same smile she'd given him in the rain when she'd called him something rare. Then she was gone, disappearing through the side door before Evan could react. Evan, we need to get you out of here. Patricia was pulling him toward the exit, using her body to block reporters. No comment. Mr. Ross has no comment at this time. They made it to the hallway, then to the elevator, then finally outside into the brilliant sunshine that now felt deserved. Evan stood on the courthouse steps, breathing in the spring air, and felt something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. "I need to get Maddie," he said suddenly. "I need to see her. I need to tell her—" "Go," Patricia said, grinning. "Go get your daughter. We'll handle the paperwork later." Evan ran to his car, hands shaking so badly he could barely get the key in the ignition. The drive to Maddie's school felt like it took forever and no time at all. He burst into the office, wild-eyed and probably looking completely unhinged. "I need to get my daughter, Maddie Ross, 3rd grade, Mrs. Peterson's class. I need to get her right now." The secretary looked startled. "Is everything all right, Mr. Ross?" "Everything's perfect. Everything's—" His voice broke. "I just really need to see my daughter." They called Maddie down. She appeared in the office doorway looking confused and a little worried, her backpack sliding off one shoulder. "Daddy? What's wrong? Why are you here?" Evan dropped to his knees and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she squeaked in protest. "Daddy, you're squishing me." "I'm sorry, baby. I'm sorry." He was crying again, couldn't stop crying. "I love you so much. You know that, right? I love you more than anything in the entire world." "I know." Maddie pulled back to look at his face, her small hands on his cheeks. "Daddy, why are you crying? Did something happen?" "Something good happened. Something really, really good." He kissed her forehead, her nose, her cheeks. "I get to keep my promise. I get to be here when you get home from school. Forever." Maddie didn't fully understand, but she hugged him anyway, and that was enough. They went home together, stopping for ice cream even though it was the middle of a school day. They sat in the park and ate chocolate chip cookie dough while Maddie told him about the spelling test she'd aced and the boy in her class who ate glue. Normal things. Beautiful. Mundane. Normal things. That evening, after dinner and homework and a long bath that Maddie needed because she'd somehow gotten ice cream in her hair, Evan tucked her into bed with Mr. Whiskers and the Dragon Book. "Daddy?" she said as he was about to turn off the light. "Yeah, sunshine?" "I'm glad you're happy again." Evan's throat tightened. "Me too, baby. Me too." After she fell asleep, Evan sat alone in the dark living room and finally let himself fall apart. All the fear, all the stress, all the months of terror came pouring out in great heaving sobs that he muffled with a pillow so he wouldn't wake Maddie. He'd been so close to losing everything, so close to prison, to being separated from his daughter, to having his entire life destroyed by a man who saw him as nothing more than a convenient scapegoat. But he'd been saved. By forensic evidence, yes. By Dr. Mitchell's expertise, absolutely. But also by Judge Marin Caldwell, who had questioned everything, who had demanded authentication, who had seen through Victor's lies with precision that felt personal. Evan pulled out her business card again, the embossed letters familiar now. He stared at it for a long time, wondering if he'd ever get a chance to thank her, wondering if she even wanted to be thanked, wondering if that tiny smile in the courtroom meant what he hoped it meant. The next week passed in a strange, dreamlike haze. The story exploded in local news. Local businessman accused of framing employee and judge exposes corporate embezzlement scheme dominated headlines. Victor Hale was formally charged with embezzlement, evidence tampering, and fraud. His empire began to crumble as investors fled and employees came forward with stories of corruption. Evan was vindicated. Completely, publicly, unquestionably vindicated. But he felt unmoored. For months, his entire existence had revolved around survival, around fighting the charges, around protecting Maddie. Now that it was over, he didn't know what to do with himself. He quit his job at the warehouse, couldn't stand to be in that building anymore, and found new work at a small auto repair shop that paid better and had reasonable hours. The owner, a gruff man named Bill, who'd read about Evan's case in the paper, hired him on the spot. "Anyone who stops in a rainstorm to help a stranger is someone I want on my team," Bill said, referencing the detail that had made it into several news articles. Evan settled into the new routine: morning drop-off with Maddie, work at the shop, fixing cars and actually using the skills his late father had taught him, evening pickup, dinner, Homework, stories, sleep, simple, normal, good. But something was missing. He couldn't stop thinking about Judge Caldwell, about how she'd systematically dismantled the prosecution's case, about how she'd looked at him in that courtroom, not with pity, but with something that felt like understanding, about that tiny smile that haunted his dreams. 2 weeks after the charges were dismissed, Evan found himself standing outside the hardware store near his apartment, staring at a display of battery terminals and jumper cables. He'd come here for work supplies. Bill had asked him to pick up some tools, but his mind was elsewhere. "Do you know where the battery connectors are?" The voice froze him in place. He knew that voice, had heard it in the rain, in the courtroom, in his dreams. Evan turned slowly. Judge Maren Caldwell stood 3 feet away, wearing jeans and a simple blue sweater, her hair down around her shoulders instead of pulled back in that severe professional style. She looked younger somehow, softer, real. She was smiling. "Hello, Evan," she said quietly. "Judge Caldwell." His voice came out strangled. What are you doing here?" "Shopping, same as you. And please, call me Maren. I'm not on the bench right now." She gestured at the aisle around them. "I really do need battery connectors, actually. My car's been acting up, and I thought I should keep supplies on hand. You know, in case I get stranded in a storm again." There was something in her tone, something playful, something that made Evan's heart race. "You knew," he said, "in the courtroom, that first day. You recognized me." Maren's smile widened. "The second you walked in, I nearly fell out of my chair. But you didn't say anything. You acted like I was doing my job." She stepped closer, her voice dropping. "Evan, I couldn't acknowledge that I knew you. It would have been grounds for recusal. The case would have been transferred to another judge, and given the evidence I saw, I wasn't confident anyone else would have caught the problems I did. So you stayed on the case because I knew what kind of man you were." Maren's eyes were intense, searching his face. "I spent 5 minutes with you in the rain, Evan. 5 minutes. And I saw someone exhausted, probably struggling, definitely having a terrible night, who still stopped to help a stranger. Someone who refused payment. Someone who fixed my car with worn-out tools and wouldn't accept so much as a thank you." She paused. "When I saw you in that courtroom, accused of theft, I knew something was wrong. I knew it in my bones. So you, what? Bent the rules for me?" "I followed the rules," Maren corrected gently. "I demanded proper authentication of evidence, which is standard judicial practice. I required forensic examination, which any good judge would have required given the circumstances. I did my job, Evan. I just did it very, very carefully. Because of that night." "Because of that night," she agreed. "Because I knew the prosecution was wrong about you, and I wasn't going to let an innocent man go to prison if I could prevent it." Evan's hands were shaking. He shoved them in his pockets. "You risked your career for me." "I risked nothing. I followed procedure." "Maren, okay, fine." She laughed, and it was that same bright sound from the storm. "Maybe I bent a few things. Maybe I pushed harder than I normally would have. Maybe I called in some favors to get Dr. Mitchell assigned to your case because I knew she was the best and would find the truth." Her expression turned serious. "But I would do it again, Evan, in a heartbeat. Because that night in the rain, you showed me something I don't see often enough in my courtroom. Basic human decency. Kindness without expectation of reward. And I wasn't going to let Victor Hale destroy that." They stood there in the middle of the hardware store, surrounded by tools and paint cans and fluorescent lights, and Evan felt something shift in his chest, something that felt dangerously like hope mixed with something deeper. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "after the trial, but I didn't know how, didn't know if I should." "You can thank me now." Maren tilted her head. "Maybe over coffee, if you're interested." "I have to pick up my daughter from school in an hour." "Then coffee will have to be quick, or—" She hesitated, suddenly looking uncertain. "Or maybe all 3 of us could get ice cream instead. I'd like to meet Maddie, if that's okay." Evan's throat was so tight he could barely speak. "You want to meet my daughter?" "I want to know the people I fought for," Maren said softly. "I want to know the family I helped keep together. And maybe, if you're interested, I'd like to be part of your lives. As friends. Maybe more than friends, eventually. If that's something you'd want. I'm nobody, Evan heard himself say. I'm a single dad working at an auto shop. I live in a tiny apartment. I drive a car that's held together with duct tape and prayer. You're a judge. I'm someone who knows that the best people aren't measured by their job titles or their bank accounts, Marin interrupted. I'm someone who's been alone for too long because I kept dating men who looked good on paper but had no substance. And I'm someone who can't stop thinking about the man who stopped in the rain. She reached out tentatively and took his hand. I'm not asking you to be anyone other than who you are, Evan. That person is more than enough. Evan looked down at their joined hands, at this woman who had saved his life in more ways than one, and felt tears prick his eyes for what felt like the 100th time that week. Ice cream sounds perfect, he whispered. They bought their supplies. Evan actually did need tools, and Marin got her battery connectors, and walked out of the hardware store together. They exchanged phone numbers, made plans to meet at the ice cream shop near Evan's apartment in an hour, and when they parted ways in the parking lot, Marin squeezed his hand one more time. Thank you for stopping that night, she said. Thank you for saving my life, Evan replied. She smiled. We saved each other. An hour later, Evan sat in his car outside Maddie's school, gripping the steering wheel and trying to calm his racing heart. He'd called Patricia on the drive over, needing to talk to someone before he completely lost his mind. You met her at a hardware store? Patricia had said, her voice somewhere between amused and incredulous. The judge who saved your life just happened to be shopping in the same aisle. I know how it sounds. It sounds like fate, Evan, or a romantic comedy, maybe both. Patricia had laughed. And she wants to meet Maddie over ice cream? Is that crazy? Is this all crazy? I mean, she's a judge and You're a good man who deserves something good in his life, Patricia had interrupted firmly. Stop overthinking this. Go get your daughter. Get ice cream with a woman who clearly likes you. Let yourself be happy for once. Now, watching the school doors, Evan tried to follow that advice, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. What if Maddie didn't like Marin? What if this was too soon? What if he was making a terrible mistake bringing his daughter into something that might not even be real? The bell rang. Kids poured out in their usual chaotic flood. And there was Maddie, backpack bouncing, ponytail swinging, running toward him with that gap-toothed smile that made everything in his world make sense. Daddy! She climbed into the car, chattering before she even closed the door. You'll never guess what happened today. Tommy Martinez brought his pet lizard for show and tell, and it escaped, and Mrs. Peterson screamed and climbed on her desk, and Emma said it was the funniest thing she'd ever seen in her entire life. That's great, Sunshine. Evan pulled out of the parking lot, his voice sounding strained even to his own ears. Hey, so I have a surprise. Maddie's eyes lit up. A surprise? What kind of surprise? Is it a puppy? Please tell me it's a puppy. It's not a puppy. A kitten? Not a kitten either. Evan took a breath. We're going to meet someone, a friend of mine, for ice cream. Oh. Maddie's excitement dimmed slightly. Who? Her name is Marin. She's really nice, and I think you'll like her. There was a long pause. Maddie was 8, but she was perceptive in ways that constantly surprised Evan. When she spoke again, her voice was careful, testing. Is she your girlfriend? No, I mean, not yet. We're just friends. We just met, really. Evan was fumbling, his face heating up. She's someone who helped Daddy out when things were hard, and I thought it would be nice for you to meet her. Another pause. Is she pretty? Maddie? Because if she's pretty and nice and you like her, then maybe she could be your girlfriend. Emma's mom has a boyfriend now, and Emma says he's nice and makes her mom happy. Maddie swung her legs under her seat. You should be happy, Daddy. You've been sad for a really long time. Evan's throat tightened. I have you. That makes me happy. I know, but grown-ups need grown-up friends too. That's what Mrs. Kowalski says. Maddie reached over and patted his arm with her small hand. It's okay, Daddy. You can have a girlfriend. I won't be weird about it. Evan laughed despite his nerves. You won't be weird about it? I promise. I'll be very mature and sophisticated. You're 8. 8.5, Maddie corrected seriously. That's practically a teenager. They pulled into the ice cream shop parking lot, and Evan's heart nearly stopped. Marin was already there, standing by the entrance, wearing those same jeans and blue sweater. When she saw his car, she waved, and Evan saw her take a deep breath like she was as nervous as he was. "That's her?" Maddie whispered, suddenly shy. "That's her." "She is pretty," Maddie observed. "And she looks nice. She has a nice smile." "Yeah," Evan agreed softly. "She does." They got out of the car. Evan's legs felt unsteady as they approached. Maddie suddenly pressed against his side, one hand clutching his shirt. Marin knelt down immediately when they reached her, putting herself at Maddie's eye level. "Hi," she said gently. "You must be Maddie. Your dad has told me so much about you." Maddie peeked out from behind Evan. "He has?" "He has. He says you're the smartest, funniest, bravest 8-year-old in the world, and that you love dragons." 8.5, Maddie corrected, but she was smiling now. "And I do love dragons. Do you like dragons?" "I think they're pretty amazing," Marin said seriously, "especially the ones that breathe ice instead of fire. Those are my favorites." "Mine too." Maddie stepped away from Evan slightly. "Everyone always talks about fire dragons, but ice dragons are way cooler. Literally cooler. That's a joke." Marin laughed, and it was genuine and warm. "That's a very good joke. I'm going to use that." They went inside, and the next hour passed in a way that felt almost magical. Maddie ordered her usual chocolate chip cookie dough. Evan got vanilla. Marin got something with caramel and sea salt that she offered to share with both of them. They sat at a corner table, and Maddie talked about school and Emma and the escaped lizard and her dragon book, and how her daddy was the best daddy in the whole world, even though he made terrible pancakes. "I heard you make excellent pancakes," Marin said to Evan, her eyes twinkling. "Maddie's standards are very high." "They're lumpy," Maddie said matter-of-factly. "But they taste good. That's what matters." Marin asked questions that showed she was actually listening, not just being polite. She laughed at Maddie's jokes. She seemed genuinely interested in everything an 8-year-old girl had to say. And when Maddie asked, "So how did you meet my daddy?" Marin glanced at Evan and told a version of the truth. My car broke down in a really bad storm. I was stuck on the side of the road, and I was scared. And your dad stopped to help me. He fixed my car and wouldn't even let me pay him." "That sounds like Daddy," Maddie said proudly. "He's always helping people. Last week he helped Mrs. Kowalski carry her groceries up 3 flights of stairs, even though his back was hurting." "Your daddy is a very good man," Marin said, and the way she looked at Evan made his chest tight. "I know," Maddie said. Then, with the blunt honesty of childhood, "Are you going to be his girlfriend?" "Maddie!" Evan choked on his ice cream, but Marin just smiled. "Would that be okay with you if I was?" Maddie considered this seriously, taking another bite of ice cream while she thought. "Do you promise not to be mean to him? Because some of Emma's mom's boyfriends were mean and made Emma sad." "I promise I will never be mean to your dad," Marin said solemnly. "And do you promise not to try to replace my mom? Because nobody can replace my mom." Evan's heart cracked. He hadn't realized Maddie had been thinking about this, worrying about this. "Sunshine, nobody could ever replace Mommy. I would never try to replace your mom," Marin said gently, reaching across the table to touch Maddie's hand. "Your mom was special and important and will always be your mom. If your dad and I become close, I would just be someone extra, someone who cares about both of you, okay?" Maddie studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Okay. Then yes, you can be his girlfriend, but only if you also promise to come to my school play next month. I'm going to be a tree." "A tree?" Marin's lips twitched. "An important tree. The most important tree in the whole forest." "Then I absolutely have to be there," Marin said seriously. "I wouldn't miss the most important tree for anything." They finished their ice cream and walked out into the late afternoon sunshine. Maddie skipped ahead to look at a dog tied up outside the neighboring store, giving Evan and Marin a moment of relative privacy. "She's wonderful," Marin said softly. "You've done an incredible job with her, Evan." "I'm just trying not to screw it up," Evan admitted. "Most days I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing." "That's called being a parent. You're doing better than you think." Marin hesitated, then added quietly, I meant what I said in there, about never trying to replace her mother. I know that's sacred ground. Sarah would have liked you, Evan heard himself say. She was always trying to get me to be less of a workaholic, to let people in. She would have said I needed someone like you in my life. Tell me about her? So Evan did. Standing in the parking lot of an ice cream shop while his daughter played with a stranger's dog, he told Marin about Sarah, about how they'd met in college, about her terrible sense of direction and her incredible laugh, about how she'd fought cancer with such courage and grace that it broke his heart to remember, about how she'd made him promise in those final days that he would let himself be happy again someday. I haven't kept that promise very well, Evan said, his voice rough. I've just been surviving, for Maddie, but not really living. Maybe you can start now, Marin said gently. Maddie came running back. Daddy, that dog's name is Princess, and she's a rescue, and can we please get a dog? Please, please, please? We'll talk about it, Evan said, the universal parent response that meant probably not. That's what you always say. Maddie turned to Marin. Can you help me convince him? I think that's between you and your dad, Marin said diplomatically, but I will say that every family deserves a dog. See, Daddy? Every family. They said goodbye in the parking lot. Marin gave Maddie a hug that Maddie actually returned without prompting. Then she turned to Evan, and there was a moment of awkwardness as they both tried to figure out the appropriate goodbye. Coffee sometime? Marin asked. Real coffee, not rushed? Maybe dinner? I'd like that, Evan said. A lot. Good. She smiled, then impulsively leaned in and kissed his cheek. Thank you for today, for letting me meet Maddie, for giving me a chance. She left before Evan could respond, climbing into her car, a newer sedan, not the luxury one from that rainy night, and driving away with a wave. Evan stood there like an idiot, one hand touching his cheek where she'd kissed him, feeling like a teenager instead of a 32-year-old father. Daddy's got a girlfriend, Maddie sang from the back seat as they drove home. Daddy's got a girlfriend. We just met, Sunshine. But you like her. I can tell. Your face gets all weird when you look at her. My face does not get weird. It totally does. You get all smiley and nervous. It's cute. Evan glanced at her in the rearview mirror. You really think she's okay? You're not just saying that? Maddie's expression turned serious. I think she's really nice, Daddy, and I think she makes you happy. That's what matters. Over the next few weeks, Evan and Marin fell into a rhythm that felt natural despite how unusual the circumstances were. They met for coffee, for lunch, for walks in the park. Sometimes Maddie came along. Sometimes it was just the two of them. They talked about everything and nothing, about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, their favorite books and movies and foods. Marin told him about her path to becoming a judge, about growing up with a single mother who worked 3 jobs, about law school and the grinding work of building a career in a system that didn't always want women in positions of power, about her failed marriage to a man who'd wanted a trophy wife instead of a partner, about the loneliness of sitting on the bench and making decisions that affected people's lives while having no one to come home to. Evan told her about his parents, both gone now, about falling in love with Sarah at 19 and thinking they'd have forever, about those 3 brutal years of watching cancer steal her piece by piece, about the terror of single fatherhood, about working multiple jobs and never sleeping and constantly worrying that he wasn't enough for Maddie, about Victor Hale and the nightmare that had almost destroyed everything. I still can't believe he just targeted me randomly, Evan said one evening. They were sitting on a bench overlooking the river, Maddie at the playground nearby with Mrs. Kowalski supervising. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. People like Victor Hale see other people as chess pieces, Marin said quietly. You weren't a person to him. You were a problem to be solved, a liability to be eliminated. He's going to prison, right? Patricia says the evidence is overwhelming. He's going to prison, Marin confirmed. My colleague Judge Richardson is handling his case. I recused myself given my involvement in your situation, but from what I hear, Victor's lawyers are already negotiating a plea deal. He's looking at 15 to 20 years. Evan was quiet for a moment. Then, I should feel happy about that, vindicated, but mostly I just feel tired. That's normal. You've been through trauma, Evan. It doesn't just disappear because you got justice. Marin reached over and took his hand, a gesture that had become familiar over the past weeks. Give yourself time to heal. Is that what you're doing? Healing? She smiled. Maybe we're healing each other. Their first real date, without Maddie, just the two of them, happened on a Friday night 6 weeks after that day at the hardware store. Evan was a nervous wreck getting ready, trying on 3 different shirts before settling on a simple button-down that wasn't too formal but wasn't too casual. Maddie supervised, offering fashion advice that mostly consisted of, "Not that one, Daddy. That one makes you look old." "I am old." "You're 32. That's not old. Mrs. Kowalski is old. You're just grown up." Mrs. Kowalski agreed to watch Maddie for the evening, winking at Evan when he dropped her off. "Have fun, dear. Don't do anything I wouldn't do." "Mrs. Kowalski, I'm old, not dead. I remember what dating was like." She shooed him away. "Now go. Make that lovely judge woman fall completely in love with you." The restaurant Marin had chosen was small and intimate, with soft lighting and quiet music and the kind of atmosphere that made Evan feel underdressed despite his good shirt. But when Marin walked in wearing a simple black dress and heels, her hair down and her smile bright, Evan forgot about everything else. "Hi," she said, slightly breathless. "Hi," Evan managed. "You look beautiful. You clean up pretty well yourself." They were seated at a corner table, and for the first few minutes there was an awkwardness that hadn't existed during their casual meetings. This felt official, like they were acknowledging that this was something real, something that mattered. "I'm nervous," Marin admitted, laughing. "Isn't that ridiculous? I face down hardened criminals in my courtroom, but I'm nervous about dinner." "I'm terrified," Evan said honestly. "I haven't done this in over a decade. I don't even know how to date anymore." "We could just talk, like we always do. Pretend this is coffee instead of dinner. Coffee where I'm desperately trying not to stare at you because you look incredible." Marin blushed, actually blushed, and Evan felt some of his nervousness fade. She was just as uncertain as he was, just as invested in this working out. They ordered food and talked, the conversation flowing more easily once they relaxed into it. They talked about Maddie's upcoming school play, about Evan's job at the repair shop, about a case Marin was hearing involving a dispute over a very expensive painting. They talked about their favorite places they'd traveled. For Evan, a camping trip to Yellowstone with Sarah and baby Maddie. For Marin, a solo trip to Ireland after her divorce. "I spent 2 weeks hiking and staying in bed and breakfast and not talking to anyone unless I had to," Marin said. "It was exactly what I needed, time to figure out who I was when I wasn't someone's wife or someone's judge. Just me." "And who were you?" "Someone who liked her own company. Someone who was stronger than she thought." Marin took a sip of wine. "Someone who was ready to build a life on her own terms instead of what everyone expected." "Is this part of that life?" Evan asked quietly. "Me? Us?" "I hope so." Marin set down her glass. "I wasn't looking for this, Evan. I'd actually convinced myself I was fine alone, that I didn't need romance or partnership or any of that. And then you stopped in the rain, and something shifted." "What shifted?" "I remembered what it felt like to be cared for by someone who expected nothing in return. Someone who helped because it was the right thing to do, not because they wanted something from me." She reached across the table, her fingers finding his. "And then I saw you in my courtroom, this good man being destroyed by a system that was failing him, and I couldn't just sit back and watch it happen." "You saved my life," Evan said, his voice rough. "You saved mine first. That night in the rain? I wasn't just stranded, Evan. I was coming from a terrible day. I'd presided over a case where I had to send a young mother to prison because the law required it, even though every part of me knew she was more victim than criminal. I was sitting in that car before the battery died, crying and questioning everything about my career, wondering if I was making any difference at all." Marin's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "And then you appeared. This exhausted, kind man who fixed my car and wouldn't take money and reminded me that there are still good people in the world. You saved me just as much as I saved you." Evan couldn't speak. He just held her hand and tried not to let the emotion overwhelming him spill over in the middle of this nice restaurant. They finished dinner and walked along the river afterward, the city lights reflecting on the water, the night air cool and pleasant. Marin slipped her hand into Evan's, and they walked in comfortable silence for a while. "I need to tell you something," Evan said eventually. "About Maddie. About how I'm raising her. Okay? She's everything to me, and I know that sounds like something every parent says, but for me she's all I have left of Sarah. She's the best parts of both of us. And I will never ever put anyone before her. Ever. If this," he gestured between them, "if we become something serious, you need to know that Maddie comes first. Always." "I would never ask you to put me before your daughter," Marin said firmly. "And honestly, if you did, I'd lose all respect for you. The fact that Maddie is your priority is one of the things I love most about you." Evan stopped walking. "One of the things you love?" Marin stopped too, turning to face him. "Did I say love? I meant one of the things I like." "You said love." "It's too soon for love," Marin said, but she was smiling. "Way too soon," Evan agreed. We barely know each other. Barely at all. So it would be crazy to say I'm falling in love with you." "Completely crazy," Evan whispered, stepping closer. "But I am," Marin said softly. "I'm falling in love with you, Evan Ross. With your kindness and your terrible pancakes and the way you love your daughter and the way you stopped in the rain." "I'm falling in love with you too," Evan said, and then he was kissing her right there on the Riverwalk with the city lights around them and the water flowing past and everything feeling impossibly, wonderfully right. When they finally pulled apart, both of them breathless and smiling, Marin laughed. "Well, that escalated quickly." "Too fast?" "No, just fast enough." She kissed him again, softer this time. "Take me home?" "I have to pick up Maddie from Mrs. Kowalski's." "I know, I meant take me to meet Mrs. Kowalski officially. Let me be part of your world, Evan. All of it. The late-night pickups, and the lumpy pancakes and the school plays. Let me be part of your family." Evan's throat was too tight to speak. He just nodded and took her hand, and they walked back to his car together. Mrs. Kowalski took one look at them when they arrived and clapped her hands together with delight. "Oh, you two look like you've had a wonderful evening." "We did," Marin said, smiling. "Thank you for watching Maddie." "It's never a chore, dear. That girl is an angel." Mrs. Kowalski lowered her voice conspiratorially. "She's asleep in the guest room, conked out during the movie." They found Maddie curled up on Mrs. Kowalski's floral couch, Mr. Whiskers tucked under her chin, completely dead to the world. Evan bent to pick her up, but Marin touched his arm. "Let me help. We'll carry her together." They did, Marin supporting Maddie's legs while Evan carried her shoulders, the three of them navigating the hallway to Evan's apartment like a tiny, imperfect unit. They got Maddie into bed without waking her, and then they stood in the doorway together, watching her sleep. "She's so beautiful," Marin whispered. "She's my whole world," Evan replied. "I know, and I want to be part of that world, if you'll let me." Evan turned to look at her, this woman who had appeared in his life during the worst storm he'd ever faced and somehow become his anchor. "Yeah," he said softly. "Yeah, I think I'd like that a lot." They kissed goodnight at the door, and Evan watched Marin drive away before going back inside. He checked on Maddie one more time, then collapsed on his own bed, exhausted and happy and terrified and hopeful all at once. His phone buzzed. A text from Marin. "Thank you for tonight, for letting me in, for being you." Evan smiled and typed back. "Thank you for stopping for coffee, for being patient with me, for saving my life in more ways than one. We saved each other. Remember?" "Yeah, we did. We did." The months that followed felt like learning to breathe again after being underwater for too long. Evan woke up each morning without the crushing weight of fear in his chest, without the constant calculation of how many days he had left with Maddie. He went to work at Bill's auto shop and actually enjoyed it, finding satisfaction in fixing engines and diagnosing problems that had clear solutions. He picked Maddie up from school and helped with homework and made his terrible pancakes on Sunday mornings, and everything felt lighter somehow. And through it all, there was Marin. She became part of their routine so gradually that Evan couldn't pinpoint exactly when she stopped being a guest and started being family. She came to Maddie's soccer games and cheered louder than anyone else. She joined them for pizza nights and sat on the floor building elaborate blanket forts. She learned to braid Maddie's hair after watching 3 YouTube tutorials, and even though the braids were never quite even, Maddie wore them proudly. "Marin did my hair," she'd announce at school, and Evan's heart would swell with something that felt dangerously close to complete happiness. They were careful around Maddie, never pushing too hard, never moving too fast. Marin never stayed over, never crossed boundaries that might confuse an 8-year-old still processing the idea of her father dating someone. But she was present, consistently and thoroughly present, in a way that made Evan realize how lonely he'd been for so long. 3 months after that first dinner, Evan invited Marin to Maddie's school play. The performance was everything you'd expect from a third-grade production. Chaotic, too loud, with at least 2 kids crying backstage and one memorable moment when a papier-mâché rock fell on a student playing a squirrel. But when Maddie appeared as her tree, standing completely still with her arms stretched out like branches, her face serious with concentration, Evan felt tears prick his eyes. "She's the best tree I've ever seen," Marin whispered, her hand finding his in the dark auditorium. "She's perfect," Evan agreed. After the play, they took Maddie out for ice cream to celebrate. She was still wearing her brown face paint and leaf costume, chattering excitedly about how she'd almost forgotten to stay still during the forest fire scene, but remembered just in time. "You were amazing, Sunshine," Evan said, wiping chocolate ice cream off her nose. "Did you see when Tommy forgot his lines and just stood there? Mrs. Peterson had to whisper them from backstage and everyone could hear." Maddie dissolved into giggles. "It was so funny." "Everyone forgets their lines sometimes," Marin said diplomatically. "The important thing is you all did your best." "I didn't forget anything. I was a perfect tree." Maddie took another huge bite of ice cream. "Hey, Marin." "Yeah, kiddo?" "Are you going to marry my daddy?" Evan choked on his vanilla. Marin's eyes went wide. The question hung in the air like a bomb that had just gone off. "Maddie," Evan managed, his face burning. "You can't just... We haven't... That's not something you ask." "Why not?" Maddie looked genuinely confused. "Emma says when grown-ups date for a long time, they get married, and you've been dating for 3 whole months. That's pretty long." 3 months isn't that long in adult time," Marin said gently, but she was smiling. "Marriage is a big decision, sweetheart. It takes time." "But you love each other, right? You told me love was important." "It is important," Evan said, finding his voice. "But there's lots of kinds of love, and marriage is... It's complicated, Maddie." "It doesn't seem complicated. You like each other. You make each other happy. You should get married, and then Marin could live with us and we could get a dog." Maddie had clearly thought this through. "It makes perfect sense." "Out of the mouths of babes," Marin murmured, and when her eyes met Evan's, there was something in them that made his heart race. They deflected Maddie's questions for the rest of the evening, but the conversation stayed with Evan for days afterward. Marriage. He hadn't let himself think that far ahead, hadn't let himself imagine a future that complete. But now that Maddie had planted the seed, he couldn't stop thinking about it. What would it be like to wake up next to Marin every morning? To build a life with her that wasn't just borrowed moments between his responsibilities? To give Maddie the complete family she'd been not so subtly campaigning for? 2 weeks later, Evan found himself at a jewelry store during his lunch break, feeling completely out of his depth. The salesman, a slick guy with too much cologne, kept showing him rings that cost more than Evan's car. "For the woman you love, you want something that makes a statement," the salesman said, holding up a diamond that could probably be seen from space. "I want something she'll actually like," Evan countered. "Something that's not about how much I spent, but about what it means." He ended up choosing a simple ring with a small sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. It was elegant without being flashy, beautiful without being ostentatious, and most importantly, it reminded him of Marin, understated but brilliant. The salesman looked disappointed by the choice. "It's quite modest, sir. Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Evan said firmly. "This is the one." Now he just had to figure out how to propose. He asked Patricia for advice over coffee, and she nearly spit out her latte. "You're going to propose? Evan, that's wonderful." "I think I'm going to propose. Maybe. If I can figure out how." Evan ran his hands through his hair. I have no idea what I'm doing. Should it be public? Private? Should I involve Maddie? Should I plan something elaborate or keep it simple? What is Marin like? She likes... Evan paused, thinking. She likes simple things, real moments. She always talks about how much she hates pretense and performance. Then keep it simple and real, Patricia advised. Propose in a way that means something to both of you. Make it about your story, not about what proposals are supposed to look like. He talked to Mrs. Kowalski next, who immediately started crying and hugging him. Oh, Evan, Sarah would be so happy for you. She really would. You think so? I know so, dear. She never wanted you to be alone. She wanted you to find love again. Mrs. Kowalski patted his cheek. And that Marin is lovely, just lovely. She'll be good for you and Maddie both. Finally, Evan talked to the most important person, Maddie herself. He waited until bedtime, when she was tucked in with Mr. Whiskers and the nightlight casting its familiar stars across the ceiling. Sunshine, can I talk to you about something important? Maddie sat up immediately, her eyes wide. Is something wrong? Is someone sick? No, nothing like that. Everything's good. Really good, actually. Evan sat on the edge of her bed. I wanted to ask you something about Marin. Are you going to propose? Maddie's face lit up. Are you finally going to propose? How did you... Daddy, you've been acting weird for like 2 weeks, and you keep looking at Marin all funny, and Mrs. Kowalski keeps crying every time she sees you. Maddie rolled her eyes. I'm 8, not stupid. 8.5, Evan corrected automatically, and she grinned. Yeah, I'm thinking about proposing, but I wanted to make sure you were really okay with it first. Not just okay, really, truly happy about it. Maddie was quiet for a moment, her face serious in a way that reminded Evan that she'd lived through loss, too, that she understood more than most kids her age. When she spoke, her voice was small. Will you still have time for me? If you marry Marin? Oh, baby. Evan pulled her into his arms. I will always have time for you. Always. You're my number one person, Maddie. That will never change, no matter who else is in our lives. Promise? I promise. Forever and always, you're my sunshine. Nobody could ever change that. Maddie hugged him tight, then pulled back with a mischievous grin. Then yes, you should totally marry her. And when you propose, you should do it somewhere special, not boring. Somewhere with a story. Somewhere with a story, Evan repeated. Like where? I don't know. That's your job, Daddy. You're the grown-up. He thought about it for days, running through possibilities and discarding them. The restaurant where they'd had their first date? Too predictable. The park where they walked? Too public. Her apartment? Too ordinary. Then, one night while channel surfing, the weather report came on. The meteorologist was discussing an incoming storm system, and Evan felt something click into place. The rain, where it all started, where their story really began. He spent the next week watching weather forecasts obsessively, waiting for the right conditions. Marin noticed his strange behavior but didn't comment, probably assuming he was just being his usual slightly anxious self. Maddie, who knew the plan, kept giving him exaggerated winks that Marin definitely noticed but politely ignored. Finally, on a Thursday evening, the forecast called for rain. Not a violent storm like that night months ago, but steady rainfall that would last through the evening. It was perfect. Evan called Marin. Hey, are you free tonight? I am. Were you thinking dinner? Actually, I was thinking something different. Can you meet me at Miller's Point around 7? There was a pause. Miller's Point? That's the overlook near where I found you that night. Yeah. Another pause, longer this time. Evan, is everything okay? Everything's perfect. Just trust me. Always, Marin said softly. Evan arranged for Mrs. Kowalski to watch Maddie, though his daughter was bursting with the secret. Don't tell her, Maddie whispered loudly as Evan left. It's a surprise. I won't, Mrs. Kowalski promised, winking at Evan. The rain started just as Evan pulled onto the highway. It was gentle, steady, the kind of rain that felt cleansing rather than violent. He drove to Miller's Point, his heart hammering in his chest, the ring box burning a hole in his pocket. Marin was already there, standing by the overlook railing, her coat pulled tight against the rain. When she heard his car, she turned, and the smile on her face was confused but warm. "You're insane," she called out as he approached. "It's raining." "I know," Evan shouted back. "That's kind of the point." He reached her, both of them getting steadily wetter, and took her hands. She was laughing, bewildered, beautiful. "Evan, what are we doing here?" "I've been thinking about that night," he said, rain dripping down his face. "The night we met. You were stranded in a storm and I stopped to help. We were both at our lowest points, me terrified about the trial, you questioning your entire career. We were strangers who happened to need each other at exactly the right moment." "I remember," Maren said softly. "And I've been trying to figure out how to do this, how to ask you something important. I thought about fancy restaurants and romantic getaways and all these elaborate plans, but none of it felt right." Evan squeezed her hands. "Because our story isn't about elaborate plans. It's about showing up in the rain. It's about being real and honest and choosing each other, even when it's messy and complicated." "Evan? I'm not rich, Maren. I'm never going to be able to give you luxury cars or fancy vacations. I work at an auto shop. I live in a tiny apartment. I have a daughter who needs me and will always come first. My life is chaos and lumpy pancakes and school plays where the sets fall down." He was crying now, or maybe it was just rain, he couldn't tell. "But I love you. I love you so much it terrifies me, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing up for you, the way you showed up for me when I needed it most." Evan dropped to one knee in the rain, pulling out the ring box with shaking hands. Maren gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Maren Caldwell, will you marry me? Will you be part of this messy, imperfect, beautiful life? Will you let me love you in the rain and sunshine and everything in between?" For a terrifying moment, Maren just stood there, tears streaming down her face, her hands still covering her mouth. Then she was pulling him to his feet, kissing him through tears and rain and laughter. "Yes," she said against his lips. "Yes, yes, yes, you ridiculous man. Yes, I'll marry you." Evan slipped the ring on her finger with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. It fit perfectly. Everything fit perfectly. They stood there in the rain, holding each other, and Evan felt something he hadn't felt in years. Complete certainty that everything was going to be okay. More than okay. Everything was going to be wonderful. "Maddie's going to lose her mind," Maren said, laughing. "She's been hinting about this for weeks. She helped me plan it. Well, she told me to propose somewhere with a story, and this was the best story I could think of." "It's perfect." Maren held up her hand, admiring the ring in the dim light from the street lamps. "It's all perfect. You're perfect." "I'm really not." "You are to me." They drove back to Evan's apartment together, Maren following in her car, both of them soaked through and grinning like idiots. Mrs. Kowalski took one look at them and started crying again. Maddie came running out, saw the ring on Maren's finger, and screamed loud enough to wake the entire building. "You said yes! You said yes! I'm going to have a new mom!" "Stepmom," Maren corrected gently, but she was smiling through tears. "Your mom will always be your mom. But yeah, kiddo, I said yes." Maddie launched herself at both of them, wrapping her arms around their waists. "This is the best day ever. Can we get a dog now?" "Maddie," Evan started. "We'll talk about the dog," Maren said, laughing. "But not tonight. Tonight, we celebrate." They ordered pizza and ate it on the living room floor, Maddie chattering excitedly about wedding plans. She had opinions about everything. The dress should be blue, not white, because white was boring. The wedding should be outside. There should definitely be a chocolate fountain, and Mr. Whiskers should be the ring bearer. "Mr. Whiskers is a stuffed cat," Evan pointed out. "Exactly. He's very responsible." Later, after Maddie was asleep and Mrs. Kowalski had gone home, Evan and Maren sat together on the old couch, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "Are you sure about this?" Evan asked quietly. "About me? About Maddie? About this whole messy package?" "I've never been more sure of anything," Maren replied. "You and Maddie are the best thing that ever happened to me, Evan. You gave me back something I'd lost, faith that good people still exist in the world. You saved my life. You saved mine first." She twisted the ring on her finger. "We saved each other, and now we get to build something new together." The wedding planning took over their lives for the next 6 months. Maddie appointed herself chief wedding coordinator, a role she took very seriously. She made lists, drew pictures of how everything should look, and regularly informed them when their ideas were not magical enough. They kept it simple despite Maddie's elaborate visions. A small ceremony in the park where they'd walked together so many times. Close friends and family only. Patricia as Evan's best person, one of Marin's law school friends as her maid of honor. And Maddie, of course, as the flower girl, a role she'd been practicing for since the engagement. 2 weeks before the wedding, Evan got a call from Patricia. Victor Hale had taken a plea deal, 15 years in federal prison for embezzlement, wire fraud, and evidence tampering. It was over. Completely. Finally. Over. He tried to make a statement at the sentencing, Patricia told him. Said he was the real victim, that he'd been set up. Judge Richardson shut him down immediately. Told him to take responsibility for once in his life. Good, Evan said. He was surprised to find he felt nothing but relief. No anger, no vindictiveness. Just gratitude that Victor could never hurt anyone else the way he'd tried to hurt Evan. There's something else, Patricia added. Several of Victor's former employees have come forward with similar stories. Apparently you weren't the first person he tried to frame. The district attorney is investigating at least 3 other cases. Jesus. Yeah, you stopping him, you fighting back instead of taking that plea deal. It probably saved other people from the same fate. Patricia's voice was warm. You're a hero, Evan, whether you feel like one or not. Evan didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who'd gotten impossibly lucky, who'd stopped in the rain at exactly the right moment and somehow been rewarded with everything he'd ever wanted. The day of the wedding arrived with perfect autumn weather, sunny but cool, with leaves turning gold and red in the trees around the park. Evan stood at the makeshift altar, wearing a new suit that actually fit him, his hands shaking as he watched guests arrive. Bill from the auto shop was there, looking uncomfortable in dress clothes but grinning widely. Mrs. Kowalski sat in the front row, crying before the ceremony even started. Patricia stood beside Evan, looking professional and proud. And then the music started, and Maddie appeared. She'd insisted on wearing a blue dress to match what she'd decided Marin should wear. She carried a basket of flower petals and walked down the aisle with exaggerated seriousness, carefully dropping petals in a pattern she'd obviously practiced. When she reached the altar, she gave Evan 2 thumbs up and a huge grin before taking her seat. Then Marin appeared, and Evan forgot how to breathe. She wore a simple blue dress, just like Maddie had demanded, her hair loose around her shoulders. Her smile so bright it put the autumn sun to shame. She walked toward him without music, without ceremony, just walking toward the man she loved with certainty in every step. When she reached him, Evan took her hands and had to clear his throat 3 times before he could speak. The ceremony was short, the vows traditional with a few personal additions. Evan promised to always stop in the rain for her. Marin promised to use her magic gavel for good. They both promised to love Maddie and give her the family she deserved. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," Maddie shouted, "Finally!" loud enough that the entire gathering burst into laughter. Evan kissed Marin anyway, and it felt like coming home. The reception was casual, tables set up in the park, a local band playing, food from their favorite restaurants. Maddie appointed herself dance floor monitor, dragging everyone up to dance whether they wanted to or not. She particularly delighted in making Evan and Marin dance to every single song. This is exhausting, Evan muttered as they swayed to their 4th dance in a row. This is perfect, Marin corrected, her head on his shoulder. Every single bit of this is perfect. As the sun set and lights were strung up in the trees, Maddie found them and pulled them aside. She was holding something behind her back, looking nervous and excited. "I made you a wedding present," she announced. "Close your eyes." They obeyed. Evan heard rustling, then Maddie's voice. "Okay, open." She was holding a drawing, carefully colored and clearly worked on for hours. It showed 3 stick figures, a tall one with dark hair labeled Daddy, a tall one with brown hair labeled Marin, and a small one with a ponytail labeled Me, Maddie. They were holding hands in front of a house, and above them, in carefully printed letters, it said, "Our family." But in the corner of the drawing, there was a 4th figure, a woman with long hair and angel wings smiling down at the family below. Underneath, in Maddie's handwriting, "Mommy watching over us." Evan couldn't speak. Tears were streaming down his face. Beside him, Marin was crying too. I wanted you to know, Maddie said seriously, that I think Mommy is happy about this. I think she sent Marin to us because we needed her. Oh, baby, Evan managed, pulling Maddie into his arms. That's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever given me. Marin joined the hug, the three of them holding each other as the party continued around them. A family built from rain and kindness and second chances. A family that had been broken and found a way to heal. A family that was complete not despite their losses, but because they'd learned to carry those losses together. Later that night, after the reception ended and they'd said goodbye to the last guests, after they'd dropped an exhausted Maddie at Mrs. Kowalski's for the night so the newlyweds could have some time alone, Evan and Marin sat in his car, soon to be their car, in the parking lot of his apartment, soon to be their apartment. We did it, Marin said, staring at her wedding ring. We actually did it. Having second thoughts already? Evan teased. Not a single one. You? Not one. He took her hand. I keep thinking about that night in the rain, how I almost didn't stop, how I was so focused on my own problems that I nearly drove past you. But you didn't. But I almost did. And if I had, none of this would have happened. You wouldn't have been my judge. You wouldn't have questioned the evidence. I'd probably be in prison right now, and Maddie would be... He couldn't finish the sentence. Marin squeezed his hand. But you did stop. You chose kindness, even when you had every reason not to, and that choice changed both our lives. You really think Sarah sent you to us, like Maddie said? Marin was quiet for a moment. I think the universe has a way of bringing people together when they need each other. Whether that's fate or coincidence or divine intervention, I don't know. But I know I'm grateful for it. She turned to face him. I'm grateful for the rain, for the broken down car, for the judge assignment, for every impossible coincidence that brought us here. Me too, Evan whispered. Me too. They sat there a while longer, watching the stars come out, thinking about rainstorms and courtrooms and hardware stores and all the strange, beautiful ways that lives can intersect and change. Eventually, they went inside, up the narrow stairs to the small apartment that would soon be too crowded for 3 people. They'd been looking at houses, places with yards where Maddie could play, and Evan smiled at the thought where a dog could run. What are you smiling about? Marin asked. I was just thinking we're going to need to get that dog now. Maddie's going to insist. We definitely are. She's already picked out names, at least 7 different names, depending on her mood. We're going to have chaos, with all 3 of us living together. It's going to be loud and messy and sure, perfect, Marin finished. It's going to be perfectly imperfect, just like we are. 3 weeks later, they moved into a small house with a fenced backyard in a neighborhood that was safe enough for Maddie to play outside and close enough to both their jobs. Maddie got her own room, which she immediately decorated with dragon posters and declared the best room in the universe. Evan converted the garage into a workshop where he could fix cars on weekends. Marin set up a home office where she could review case files away from the courthouse. They planted a small garden that mostly died because none of them had any idea what they were doing, but the tomatoes survived, and Maddie declared them the most delicious tomatoes ever grown. And then, one Saturday morning, 2 months after they moved in, Evan surprised them both. Get in the car, he announced at breakfast. We're going somewhere. Where it? Maddie demanded. It's a surprise. They drove to the animal shelter on the other side of town. Maddie figured it out the second they pulled into the parking lot. A dog, she screamed, unbuckling her seatbelt before the car even stopped. We're getting a dog. Daddy, you didn't tell me we're getting a dog today. It was supposed to be a surprise, Evan said dryly, but he was grinning. They spent 2 hours at the shelter, Maddie insisting on meeting every single dog. She fell in love with at least 15 of them before finding the one. A medium-sized mutt with golden fur and soulful brown eyes, who'd been at the shelter for 6 months because, according to the volunteer, nobody wants the older ones. What's his name? Maddie asked. Lucky. He was found as a stray last year. Lucky, Maddie repeated, kneeling down. The dog immediately came to her, tail wagging, and licked her face enthusiastically. Hi, Lucky. Do you want to come home with us? Lucky barked once, as if answering yes. This one, Maddie announced. This is our dog. The volunteer smiled. He's a good boy, fully house-trained, good with kids, very gentle. You're giving him a wonderful home. He's giving us a wonderful dog, Marin said, watching Maddie hug Lucky with pure joy on her face. They took Lucky home that afternoon, stopping at a pet store to buy supplies that cost more than Evan wanted to admit. Lucky settled into their house like he'd always belonged there, claiming the corner of the living room as his spot and following Maddie everywhere she went. That night, after Maddie was asleep with Lucky curled up at the foot of her bed, despite their agreement that the dog would sleep in the living room, Evan and Marin sat on their back porch, watching fireflies in the garden. "We have a house," Evan said wonderingly. "A dog. A family. Sometimes I have to pinch myself to make sure this is real." "It's real," Marin assured him. "All of it. The house, the dog, the life we're building. It's all real." "I never thought I'd have this again. After Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over, that I'd raise Maddie alone and that would be enough. And it would have been. You're an incredible father, Evan. You would have been fine." "But this is better," Evan said. "This is so much better. Having you here, having someone to share it all with, the good days and the bad days and the normal, boring days. I didn't realize how much I'd been just surviving until I started living again." Marin leaned against him. "You gave me the same thing. I was so lonely before I met you, Evan. I had my career and my apartment and my routine, and I kept telling myself it was enough. But it wasn't. I was empty. And then you stopped in the rain, and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to connect with someone real." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out, listening to the sounds of their neighborhood settling in for the night. "Do you ever wonder about the other version?" Evan asked eventually. "The version where I didn't stop that night? Where you got your car fixed by someone else, or walked to a gas station, or called a different tow truck?" "Sometimes," Marin admitted, "and it terrifies me. Because in that version, I probably never knew you existed. You went to trial with a different judge who didn't question the evidence as carefully, and everything went so wrong. I try not to think about it. Me neither. Because this version, our version, is the one that matters. This is the reality we're living in, the one where you stopped, where I recognized you, where we saved each other. Where we get to keep saving each other," Evan added. "Every single day," Marin agreed. The months turned into years with the gentle, steady progression of a life well lived. Maddie grew from 8 to 9 to 10, getting taller and smarter and more opinionated with each passing year. She kept her mother's picture on her nightstand and talked to it sometimes, telling Sarah about her day, about Lucky's latest antics, about how Marin was teaching her to bake bread that actually rose. "I think Mom would like Marin," she told Evan one night. "I think they would have been friends." "I think so too, Sunshine." Evan thrived at Bill's auto shop, eventually becoming the shop's manager when Bill decided to semi-retire. He hired 2 new mechanics and discovered he was good at managing people, at creating the kind of workplace where employees felt valued. Several of the guys he hired were men trying to rebuild their lives after incarceration, and Evan made it his mission to give them the second chances he'd been given. Marin continued her work as a judge, building a reputation for fairness and thoroughness that made her respected even by lawyers who lost cases in her courtroom. She started a mentorship program for young women interested in law, using her own story. Single mother raised by a struggling mom, worked her way through school, built a career despite obstacles to inspire others. They had ordinary problems, of course, arguments about whose turn it was to do dishes, stress about bills and home repairs, and Maddie's increasingly expensive school activities. Moments of frustration and exhaustion and the general chaos of juggling 2 careers, a preteen, and a dog who had strong opinions about everything. But through it all, they had each other. They had the foundation built on that rainy night, strengthened by everything they'd survived together. On their 3rd anniversary, Evan took Marin back to Miller's Point. It wasn't raining this time. The night was clear and crisp, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. 3 years, Marin said, leaning against the railing. "Remember when we stood here in the rain and you proposed? I remember being terrified you'd say no. I remember thinking you were insane for proposing in a rainstorm." She laughed. "But also thinking it was the most romantic thing anyone had ever done. It suited us. Nothing about our story has been conventional." Thank God for that. Marin turned to face him. Conventional is boring. Give me rainstorms and courtroom drama and hardware store meetings any day. What about the rest of our lives? Evan asked. What does that look like? More of this. More ordinary days and extraordinary moments. Watching Maddie grow up. Growing old together. Maybe traveling when Maddie goes to college. Seeing the world we've been too busy to explore. Marin smiled. Maybe eventually becoming grandparents to kids who roll their eyes at our stories about meeting in a rainstorm. That sounds perfect. It does, doesn't it? They stood there a while longer, in the spot where everything had started, and thought about the future stretching ahead of them. A future built on the foundation of one man's choice to stop in the rain. One act of kindness that had rippled outward, changing everything. 5 years after that rainy night, Maddie stood at middle school graduation, giving a speech she'd written about the importance of helping strangers. She told the story of how her father had stopped to help someone in a storm, and how that single act had changed their family's entire trajectory. We never know how one small choice might affect our lives, she said, reading from her carefully prepared notes. My dad didn't know that helping a stranded motorist would lead to meeting my stepmom. He didn't know it would give us our dog Lucky, or our house, or this whole life we have now. He just knew someone needed help, and he chose to stop. She looked up from her notes, finding Evan and Marin in the audience. The lesson I've learned from my parents is that kindness matters. That showing up for people matters. That the smallest choices can have the biggest impacts. And that love, real love, comes from choosing to be there for each other, especially when it's hard, especially when it's inconvenient, especially when you have every reason to just keep driving. The audience applauded. Evan was crying as usual. Marin was holding his hand, also crying. Lucky was at home, hopefully not destroying the furniture. After the ceremony, they took pictures and went out for ice cream because some traditions were sacred. Maddie had grown from that gap-toothed 8-year-old into a poised, almost teenager who still loved chocolate chip cookie dough and dragons, and her family with fierce loyalty. I can't believe you told that story in front of everyone, Evan said, equal parts proud and embarrassed. It's a good story, Dad. People need to hear good stories. Maddie took a bite of ice cream. Besides, it's true. You and Marin are basically a fairy tale, except real. We're not a fairy tale, Marin protested. We're just two people who found each other at the right time. That's literally what fairy tales are, Maddie said wisely. Right person, right time, right circumstances, except yours has a rainstorm and a courtroom instead of a castle and a ball. When did you get so smart? Evan asked. I've always been smart. You just notice it more now that I can argue better. They laughed. This family built from broken pieces and rainstorms and impossible chances. They finished their ice cream and drove home to their house with the backyard where Lucky was definitely destroying something, to their ordinary life that felt extraordinary every single day. That night, after Maddie was asleep and Lucky was curled up in his corner and the house was quiet, Evan and Marin sat together on their back porch like they did most nights. Do you ever miss it? Marin asked suddenly. The before? The simplicity of it being just you and Maddie? Evan thought about it honestly. Sometimes I miss how simple things were. Just the two of us, our routine, our little bubble. But then I remember how lonely I was, how much I was just going through the motions. He pulled her closer. This is better. This is so much better. Even when it's complicated and messy and chaotic. I wouldn't trade this for anything. Me neither, Marin said softly. You and Maddie gave me a family I never thought I'd have, a home that's more than just a place, a life that matters beyond my courtroom. We saved each other. Evan repeated the phrase that had become their truth. We did, and we keep saving each other every single day. They sat in the comfortable silence of people who'd learned each other's rhythms, who'd weathered storms together and come out stronger. Above them, the stars wheeled across the sky, the same stars that had witnessed a broken-down car on a rainy night years ago, a terrified father and a stranded judge who'd found each other in the chaos. Inside, Maddie slept soundly, dreaming whatever dreams 13-year-olds dream, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and safe and part of something unbreakable. Lucky dozed in his corner, one ear twitching at the sound of a distant siren. The house settled into its nighttime creaks and groans, holding this family in its walls like a promise. And on the back porch, Evan and Marin held hands and watched the fireflies dance in the garden they'd planted together, thinking about rainstorms and courtrooms and hardware stores and all the impossible moments that had led them here, to this life, this family, this perfect, imperfect, extraordinary, ordinary existence. To home. Their story had started in a storm, built through a trial, and bloomed into something neither of them could have imagined. And it would continue, day by ordinary day, through all the moments big and small that make up a life well lived. Because sometimes the best stories don't end in grand gestures or dramatic conclusions. Sometimes they just continue, steady and sure and filled with love, like rain falling on thirsty ground. Like a man who stopped to help a stranger. Like a judge who questioned everything. Like a little girl who believed in magic. Like a family built from kindness, courage, and the simple choice to show up for each other, again and again and again. Their story didn't need a sequel. It was complete in its continuation, perfect in its imperfection, extraordinary in its ordinariness. And if you asked any of them, Evan with his grease-stained hands and his terrible pancakes, Marin with her gavel and her fierce sense of justice, Maddie with her dragons and her wisdom beyond her years, they would all tell you the same thing. That sometimes the best thing you can do is stop in the rain, because you never know who might be waiting there, in the storm, at the exact moment when both of your lives are about to change forever.